Hi guys. Tonight we close our eyes and step back into the bitterest depths of a medieval winter. The wind claws at the shutters of a wooden hut, snow gathers like stubborn ghosts at the threshold, and yes, you are about to lie down in a place so cold and smoky that you probably won't survive this without some imagination. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, let me know your location and the local time you're listening. I always love to imagine the little dots of warmth where people gather to hear these stories. Now, dim the lights. You trudge across frozen mud into a dwelling built not for comfort but for bare survival. The hut is small, barely holding a family of 6, with walls of wattle and daub sticks and mud pressed together, cracking in the frost. Through every tiny gap, drafts find their way in, stinging your cheeks and making your breath fog. The air smells heavy, a cocktail of smoke, damp straw, and the faint sourness of old food. You duck low to avoid hitting your head on beams, blackened by centuries of fire. It is dark. The only light comes from an open hearth, its fire no more than glowing embers now, but enough to make shadows crawl across the walls. Historians agree that most peasants lived in one-room cottages, their lives compressed into a space where cooking, eating, working, and sleeping all mingled. You glance at the low ceiling and soot dripping like tears, and you realize there is nowhere to escape the smoke. It gets into your hair, your clothes, your lungs. It burns your eyes until you blink tears, but it's also the only shield against the brutal cold. Some scholars debate whether peasants deliberately smoked out their huts to drive away pests, or if the suffocating haze was merely an unhappy side effect of constant fires. Either way, your body adjusts. After a few minutes, the sting becomes background noise, a dull ache in your throat. You breathe it in like a bitter medicine. The floor beneath your feet is packed earth, slick from boots and animal droppings. There's no separation between inside and outside as you know it today. Mud comes in, dung comes in, and so does the chill. A quirky detail. Archaeologists have found remains of charred herbs scattered in some medieval hearths, suggesting that peasants occasionally tossed in sprigs of juniper or rosemary, not for the pleasant smell, but as a primitive disinfectant. Tonight, though, your fire smells only of wet wood and peat. The walls creak when the wind shoves against them. You notice rags stuffed into cracks, desperate attempts at insulation, and yet the draft still snakes across the floor, chilling your ankles. The children shiver under their coverings, pulling coarse wool over their heads. Everyone is weary from a day of hard labor, and still, sleep does not promise comfort. You hear a cough from the corner, an old man's rattling chest. Winter nights amplify every weakness. Colds spread easily in these crowded spaces, where smoke already strangles the lungs. A single sneeze echoes like a warning bell. Survival here is not about thriving but enduring, night after night, until spring finally relents. And yet, amid the harshness, there is a strange intimacy. You settle near the hearth, the warmest place, your back pressed against another body, your toes numb inside wool wrappings. Your eyelids droop despite the discomfort. The sound of crackling embers becomes oddly soothing. You wonder, as you shift on the prickly straw, how different this is from your modern bed, with soft pillows and central heating. The peasants of this world, though, know no other way. For them, the smoky air and frozen drafts are normal, expected, even woven into their dreams. Still, historians argue whether these huts were truly unbearable, or if the human body, hardened by constant exposure, simply adapted to what we would call misery. Could you adapt too, if forced to? Or would the cold chew you up in a matter of nights? The thought lingers as your breath fogs in the candlelight. The hut is quiet now. Only the faint wheeze of wind and the crackle of fire keep you company. You pull the rough blanket tighter, close your eyes, and surrender yourself to the rhythm of medieval sleep in a room that feels half like a shelter, half like a prison. You lie there, your eyes adjusting to the murky dark, and soon you realize that the bed you're in is not really your bed at all. It's everyone's. The medieval winter turns sleeping into a collective act of survival, and there is little notion of personal space. The straw mattress beneath you sags under the weight of bodies, parents, children, perhaps even a hired hand or a distant cousin. You feel elbows pressing against your ribs, a child's foot grazing your shin, and the warmth of at least two people breathing in rhythm on either side of you. It is crowded, yes, but you don't push away. In this season, distance means frostbite. You shift, and your shoulder bumps against the familiar shape of your brother's arm. He grumbles, half asleep, pulling a tattered woolen covering tighter. At the far edge of the bed, your mother murmurs, her voice low, comforting the youngest who whimpers in his sleep. One fact is clear: most peasant families did not own multiple beds. At best, there might be a wooden frame for the parents, with ropes laced to hold straw, while the children lay on pallets nearby. More often, the whole family piled together, a heap of limbs under whatever scraps of warmth they could muster. The practice had a name in some parts of Europe: bundling, and while modern ears might imagine romance, here it is purely practical. Human heat becomes the currency of survival. You learn quickly to tuck your knees, to press close, to let your body leach warmth from whoever lies nearest. Even modesty yields to necessity. You might sleep cheek to cheek with a sibling, or back to back with an aging grandparent. Privacy is a luxury reserved for lords in stone keeps. Here, the intimacy of shared sleep is as common as bread. And yes, there are quirks. In some regions, people shared beds not only with family but with strangers, travelers, hired workers, or even neighbors when the nights were dangerously cold. This wasn't scandalous. It was survival. A traveler passing through might be offered half a straw pallet, and though you might not know their name, you'd wake with their breath mingled with yours in the smoky room. Imagine introducing yourself only after dawn, once you've already shared a night pressed shoulder to shoulder. Still, historians argue whether this communal sleeping was universally accepted, or if some communities clung to stronger notions of modesty. Some sources suggest a division: adults together, children elsewhere, while others describe entire households bundled into one pile, like hibernating animals. You smile to yourself at the thought. Perhaps it varied, just as modern households vary in their eccentricities. The bed itself is not comfortable. Straw pokes at your back, working its way through thin linen sheets. You wiggle, but the straw shifts only a little, and you resign yourself to its scratchiness. Fleas stir within, unwelcome companions who thrive in the warmth of shared bodies. Still, when your toes thaw against the press of another person's calves, you think, better itchy than frozen. It is warmer in the middle of the pile. The youngest children are usually tucked there, cocooned between bodies. The outermost positions against the chill of the drafty walls are often left to the older children, or to whoever snores loudest and disturbs the rest. Tonight, you feel the sting of air seeping through cracks near your shoulder. You envy the little one in the center, wrapped like a bundle of laundry between your parents. A quirky tidbit drifts through your mind. Peasants sometimes called their shared beds the marriage bed, not because it was reserved for couples, but because so many lives began there, with entire families dozing only inches away. Love, conception, and birth all unfolded in the same crowded space where children giggled and grandmothers sighed. There was no hiding from the realities of life in these one-room huts. You stir again, noticing the soundscape. Breathing, snuffling, little coughs. The room itself seems alive. Your brother scratches, the straw rustles, and someone whispers a prayer before drifting off again. The air is still thick with smoke, but you've grown accustomed to it, like the smell of your own skin. Your eyes close for a moment, and you imagine yourself from above, a knot of people woven together, their warmth the only shield against death by cold. But there are dangers to such closeness. Sickness travels easily. A cough spreads through the family in days, a fever in hours. You recall winters when whole villages grew silent under the weight of illness, the hush broken only by the toll of a distant bell. And yet, as you lie here, pressed against loved ones, the sense of solidarity softens the fear. Better to fall ill together than to freeze alone. You wonder if the people of your time would tolerate this. Could you? Accustomed to separate bedrooms, fluffy duvets, and the comfort of closing a door, manage such intimacy every night? Perhaps you'd squirm, complain, crave solitude. Yet here, there is no choice. And in a strange way, the warmth of bodies becomes comforting, almost soothing. The rhythm of your sister's breath against your back is as steady as a lullaby. Historians still debate how peasants managed overcrowding. Were there unspoken rules about who lay where? Did the oldest always claim the hearth side? Or did mothers guard that space for infants? Records are sparse, and so scholars piece together fragments from court cases, folk songs, and travellers' accounts. But tonight, in this smoky hut, you don't need a historian to tell you. You can feel the logic. Warmth at the centre, endurance at the edges, a balance struck not by law but by instinct. Your eyes grow heavier. You pull the coarse blanket tighter, trying to ignore the chill that creeps along your exposed ear. Sleep presses down slowly, like a hand smoothing straw. You sigh, surrendering, your body tangled with others, your thoughts trailing into dreams. The medieval night swallows you whole, one shared breath at a time. You wake briefly in the night, shivering, and realize that the layers covering you are not enough. The cold presses down like a living creature, gnawing at your bones. You shift beneath the blankets, and it dawns on you that in a medieval winter, sleep is never just about bodies, it's also about layers upon layers of fabric, skins, and whatever scraps could be piled up for warmth. Your family's bedding is a patchwork, a coarse wool blanket, so heavy it feels like it could crush a child, lies across the top. Beneath that is a faded linen sheet, patched so many times that no square matches another. At the foot of the bed, tucked under the outermost sleepers, an animal hide adds a different texture, smooth in some places, stiff and cracked in others, with the faint smell of goat clinging even after years of use. This layering is not fashion but necessity. Wool is scratchy, skins are stiff, linen grows damp, but together they trap the little heat that exists. One mainstream fact: by the late Middle Ages, wealthier peasants sometimes owned feather beds, but such luxuries were rare in the villages. For most, straw and wool were the main tools. Even then, blankets were precious, sometimes passed down like heirlooms. Imagine inheriting a moth-eaten wool coverlet as if it were a treasure chest, because it meant one more barrier against frost. You wriggle beneath your family's layers, your nose peeking out into the smoky air. The heaviness comforts you, though it limits your movement. You cannot roll freely. Every adjustment tugs the blanket away from someone else. A child whines softly as cold creeps in, and your mother reaches across to pull the covering back into place. It is a nightly choreography, shifting, tugging, rearranging, all so that no one is left entirely exposed. And then there are the smaller tricks. A flat stone, heated in the fire earlier, rests near your feet, still warm enough to radiate a little comfort. It smells faintly of ash. Sometimes bricks or even iron tools were heated and wrapped in cloth for the same purpose. The danger of burns was real, but in the long hours of darkness, peasants weighed that risk against frozen toes. Tonight, the stone has cooled to lukewarm, but you still press your soles against it, grateful. A quirky tidbit drifts to mind. In some regions, people tucked dried nettles or herbs between layers of fabric, not for warmth, but to ward off moths and lice. The faint, bitter scent lingers, mixing oddly with the ever-present smoke. Whether it worked is uncertain, but the gesture shows a desperate attempt to control an environment otherwise dominated by cold and pests. You breathe in, exhale slowly, and notice how the layers trap not just warmth but smell. The wool carries years of sweat and smoke, never properly washed, only beaten clean with sticks. Linen is rinsed in icy streams on rare washing days. But in winter, water freezes too quickly to make laundry practical. The hides are rubbed with animal fat to keep them pliable, leaving a greasy residue that clings to your fingers. Your bed, then, is a museum of scents: smoke, grease, sweat, herbs, and straw. Strange to think that comfort here does not mean cleanliness, but density. Historians still argue whether peasants slept clothed under their layers or stripped down to undergarments. Some accounts suggest they never removed their woolen tunics, sleeping in the same garments worn by day. Others hint that people shed outerwear to keep bedding cleaner. Tonight, you can feel the scratch of homespun cloth still against your skin, your tunic bunched at your waist. The debate hardly matters to you. Removing clothes would mean exposing your flesh to the freezing air, and that is unthinkable. You glance at your sister beside you, her hair tangled across her face, her body curled tightly. She clutches a ragged bit of cloth, a miniature blanket she insists on keeping, though it barely covers her shoulders. Children invent their own rituals, finding safety in familiar scraps. To her, this thin cloth is as vital as the heavy wool that covers the rest of you. Your father stirs, pulling a sheepskin tighter around his legs. He grumbles, half asleep, muttering about the cold. You catch his words and think about how even adults, hardened by years of labor, never truly escape the discomfort. The layers help, but they are never enough. Night after night, winter after winter, the same battle is fought. Outside, snow presses against the walls. The hut groans softly, timbers creaking under the weight of frost. You cannot see it, but you feel its presence, the world outside encased in white silence, waiting to seep through any crack left unguarded. Inside, the only defense lies in the layers covering your body, and the layers of bodies covering one another. Sleep pulls at you again, yet discomfort keeps you half awake. You shift, careful not to uncover your legs. Your hand brushes against the coarse edge of a blanket, its weave rough like sandpaper. You marvel at how this one piece of cloth, woven on a local loom, has kept your family alive through more than a decade of winters. It is both a tool and a symbol, survival wrapped in scratchy fibers. The rhythm of breathing around you steadies, the bed becoming a slow tide of chests rising and falling. You relax, thinking of the strange intimacy of these layers. They hold not just warmth, but history, memories of nights when laughter rippled through the family before sleep, or nights when sickness spread silently from one sleeper to the next. Each fold carries ghosts of previous winters. Could you sleep like this forever? Perhaps you wonder, half dreaming, if people then even thought about comfort in the way you do. Or did they, hardened to hardship, feel a different kind of satisfaction, simply in having enough fabric to cover themselves? Historians debate endlessly about the mental world of medieval peasants, but in this moment, under layers that smell of smoke and sweat, you realize something simple. Survival itself was the comfort. And so you surrender again to drowsiness, tucked within layers that are scratchy, heavy, pungent, and life-saving. The cold prowls outside, but here, under wool and skins and linen scraps, you find the faintest edge of peace. The glow of the embers on the hearth has faded to a dull orange, but the fire is still alive, breathing faintly like an animal curled in its den. You notice how everyone keeps glancing toward it in their half-dreaming state, as if the little red light were the household's beating heart. In the harshest weeks of winter, peasants depended not only on the shared warmth of bodies and blankets, but on the fragile endurance of their hearth fires. It is well established that peasants rarely let their fires die completely. To wake in the middle of the night and discover nothing but black ash was to invite a dangerous ordeal, fumbling in the dark, with flint and steel, coaxing sparks with numb fingers, while frost gnawed at every edge of the cottage. Instead, they buried the coals under ash before sleep, preserving a faint glow that could be coaxed back into flame at dawn. If you peek closely, you see your father carefully raking embers, covering them with grey powder, whispering almost like a priest at an altar. The hearth was both kitchen and life support. It smoked, it coughed, It hissed, but it also offered the only promise of warmth. You can still feel the heat on your face when you shift slightly closer, though the warmth doesn't travel far. Beyond the first 2 feet, the air remains sharp and biting. Children edge closer until they nearly scorch their toes, only to be pulled back by their mother with a firm hand. Curiously enough, some villages believed the fire should never be left entirely alone. Someone was expected to tend the spirit of the flame, even in the dark hours. That superstition turned practical when you realize how often huts burn down during winter. A single spark leaping onto straw bedding, a log shifting unexpectedly, and suddenly the shelter turned into a death trap. The faint, smoky scent that clings to everything in this room carries both reassurance and danger. You cough softly, your throat raw from the air. The hut is filled with haze, a thick cloud that sits just below the roof beams. If you stand too quickly, your head will plunge into the smoke and sting your eyes with tears. You imagine the constant irritation on the lungs, the endless coughing that fills these nights. Physicians writing centuries later described chimneyless huts, where peasants lived half-choked, their eyes bloodshot, their chests rattling. Whether those accounts were exaggerated or not, you can feel the reality in your own chest as you draw another shallow breath. The role of firewood itself is another burden. Your father spent hours chopping and gathering it before winter. Whole families scoured the forest for fallen branches, while laws forbade peasants from cutting living trees in noble forests. Some scholars remain divided on whether peasants had a steady supply of fuel, or whether they often relied on substitutes like peat, dried dung, or even twisted straw ropes. Tonight, the acrid smell of peat makes your eyes water, telling you that good timber was likely scarce. You picture the fire as a companion in this endless season. Its crackle is the only music against the howling wind. Sparks sometimes leap upward, scattering like tiny stars against the soot-black ceiling. When you lie back and watch them, you imagine constellations, fleeting bursts of light that mirror the cold heavens outside. Perhaps peasants did the same, turning embers into stars when the real sky was hidden behind clouds. The fire doesn't just warm, it dictates the family's rhythm. Whoever sleeps closest is both privileged and vulnerable. Privileged for the heat, vulnerable because a careless roll could mean tumbling into the coals. You notice a child's singed tunic sleeve, a reminder of nights when slumber grew too deep. Mothers kept infants far from the hearth's reach, swaddled instead between bodies. The older boys sometimes dared each other to edge closer, as if testing their bravery against the glowing jaws of the fire. And yet, beyond warmth, the fire guards against fear. Shadows stretch long across the hut, and in the medieval imagination, darkness was crowded with unseen spirits. A glowing ember, even faint, was thought to keep demons at bay. Whether or not you believe such tales, you admit that the glow soothes you. Without it, the night would feel unbearably empty, a suffocating blackness pressing from all sides. Not all historians agree on how constant the fires were. Some argue that fuel shortages forced many peasants to let fires die regularly, reigniting them only in the morning. Others claim that letting the fire sleep was a dangerous luxury, and families guarded their embers fiercely. You shift closer to the heat, your hands stretching forward, and you realize the truth might be both. In desperate winters, perhaps peasants alternated between smoldering embers and icy darkness, depending on what the forest and fields had given them. You close your eyes for a moment and listen. The fire pops softly, releasing a sharp crack that startles the youngest child. Your mother hushes him, rocking him gently, while the fire resumes its whisper. That sound uneven, alive, becomes the night's heartbeat. Outside, the wind still roars, but inside, your fragile flame insists you are not entirely helpless. You imagine tomorrow. Someone will rise before dawn, coughing in the smoke, and stir the grey ash with an iron poker. A little kindling, a puff of breath, and suddenly the coals will glow brighter, flames catching dry twigs. The family will gather around, teeth chattering, waiting for the warmth to return. This routine repeats night after night, a cycle of preservation and renewal, as ancient as fire itself. The hearth isn't beautiful by modern standards. It's just a pile of stones, a scarred iron pot hanging above, soot dripping down like black tears. But to you, it feels almost holy. Without it, the hut would be a coffin of ice. With it, the smoky haze, the irritation in your lungs, even the risk of flames devouring your bed, all of it feels worth enduring. You lie back again, eyes half closed, listening to the last pop of resin in the log. Your skin tingles from where the warmth brushed against it. You realize that in this world, people measured luxury not in gold, but in the thickness of blankets, the steadiness of roofs, and the persistence of fire. And tonight, as the embers glow faintly on the hearth, you surrender once more to sleep, comforted by that fragile flame that has carried peasants through countless frozen nights. You stir awake as the hut creaks, and with that faint noise comes another sound, snorting, shuffling, the unmistakable presence of animals close by. In your modern mind, you might think of barns as separate places, neat divisions between humans and beasts. But in this world of survival, the lines blur. Tonight, in the thick of winter, the hut shelters not only people but goats, chickens, and perhaps even a pig, all breathing the same smoky air. We know from surviving manorial records that peasants often kept their animals indoors during the coldest months. It wasn't sentiment, it was necessity. A goat or a cow represents life itself. Milk to drink, manure to fertilize, perhaps meat in desperate times. Leaving them outside in snowstorms risked losing everything. So you open your eyes in the dim glow of the embers and see shapes moving. A goat tethered to the far wall, chickens clucking softly as they roost in a corner basket, and the round bulk of a pig shifting on a bed of straw. Their warmth is welcome, their smell unavoidable. The mingling of scents is overwhelming. The smoke from the hearth still clings thick in the air, but now it mixes with the pungency of manure and the sharp tang of animal breath. Your nostrils flare, half in discomfort, half in resignation. Perhaps your body, like theirs, adapts to the shared confinement. And though the odor makes your eyes water, you notice how much warmer it feels. The animals are, quite literally, heaters with hooves. An odd detail recorded in medieval accounts is that some peasants claimed pigs gave off more heat than sheep or goats, so they sometimes placed pigs nearest the sleeping area. You can almost believe it tonight as you feel the thick, warm air drifting from that corner. A low grunt tells you the pig has turned in its sleep, and you shiver less, comforted by its bulk. But this closeness comes with unease. You hear a sudden rustle as a chicken flutters, startled from its perch. Feathers drift in the smoky haze. Your sister whimpers in her sleep, perhaps brushed by one of the restless wings. In the darkness, it is hard to tell where family ends and livestock begins. Straw rustles, a goat shifts, and a human coughs, all part of the same nocturnal orchestra. Not all historians agree on how common this practice was. Some argue it was widespread in poorer regions, while others believe animals were only brought in during the harshest storms. The lack of written detail leaves space for debate, but archaeological finds of compact huts, with little separation between hearth and animal pens, suggest this shared space was far from rare. You glance at the floor near the hearth, where a thin wooden partition half-heartedly divides the human bedding from the animals. It does little to block sound, smell, or even the occasional hoof scraping. Still, the barrier matters symbolically. It reminds everyone of the difference, even if the practical reality blurs it. You wonder if the goat sees you as another herd member, bundled under wool and skins. Imagine drifting to sleep with the knowledge that predators, wolves, foxes, even desperate thieves might be sniffing at the hut's edges. The presence of animals inside is protection too. Their nearness means you can hear if something disturbs them. A pig's sudden squeal or a goat's frightened bleat might wake you before a wolf slips under the door. The animals are not only heaters but alarms. And yet, the danger is not only outside. Fires, we already know, could leap and spread. Add restless animals into the mix, and sparks become even riskier. There are stories of huts collapsing or burning when animals knocked into firewood or overturned a pot. Whether those tales grew in the retelling, you can't say, but the possibility hovers each time you hear a shuffle too close to the hearth. A curious image arises in your mind. Children naming their favorite hens, clinging to them like stuffed toys. In fact, some chronicles describe children keeping small animals in their beds, not unlike modern pets. Tonight, though, the chickens are kept apart, their soft cooing blending with the hum of sleep. Still, the hut is alive with more than just human breath, and you feel less alone. The warmth grows heavy, almost suffocating. You turn your head, inhaling shallowly, trying to find a pocket of fresher air. Instead, the blend of odors thickens, pressing on your senses until you nearly gag. Yet, within moments, you adjust, and the discomfort fades into background. This is survival, to accept what would once seem unbearable. Experts remain divided on whether peasants resented or welcomed this mingling. Was it a humiliation, to sleep beside a pig, or a point of pride, to know your household was alive and whole? Some folkloric songs hint at affection, praising the faithful cow or boasting of a fattened pig that snored through the night. Others mock the filth, suggesting that peasants smelled more like their animals than themselves. The truth, as always, may lie in between. You shift again, feeling a draft creep along the floor. The fire has dimmed further, and you instinctively edge closer to your family, your back pressing against your brother's warmth. The goat snorts, echoing your own sigh. In this mingled atmosphere, the boundaries blur not man or beast, but all creatures huddled against the same winter. And as you drift back into drowsiness, you marvel at how adaptable humans are. Could you, in your world of separate rooms and perfumed air, lie down peacefully beside a pig? Or would you recoil, insisting on distance even if it meant the risk of frostbite? For these peasants, the answer is simple. They sleep, they survive, and they wake alive, together with their animals, ready to face another day of cold. The room grows quieter as the fire slackens and the animals settle back into their own heavy breathing. Yet you notice something new now, that your senses are fully awake. The smell. It presses in on you from every corner of the hut, a constant reminder that survival in winter is rarely neat or pleasant. We know from monastic complaints and travelers' journals that medieval peasant homes carried a blend of odors most modern noses would find unbearable. Smoke from the hearth saturated the air, clinging to fabric, skin, and hair, until every sleeper reeked of ash. Layered over this was the pungent smell of damp straw, used for bedding, often reused until it turned mouldy. Add in the sharp tang of animal dung drying by the hearth, the sourness of unwashed bodies, and the acrid note of sweat trapped under wool tunics, and you have a sensory landscape as thick as the darkness itself. You inhale cautiously, feeling the weight of it. Your eyes prickle, your throat feels coated. A child beside you scratches at his neck, perhaps from fleas, perhaps just from the discomfort of filth. There is no escape from this atmosphere. Even stepping outside in the snow offers only brief relief before the frost drives you back inside, where the smoke waits patiently to embrace you again. Curiously enough, archaeologists have discovered layers of soot embedded in the rafters of old cottages, evidence of centuries of smoke accumulating in places where no chimney drew it away. In some huts, the smoke hole in the roof was too small or blocked by snow, and so the air remained dense, blue-grey, even in daylight. Imagine sunlight filtering through that haze, turning gold into dirty brown. Your nose catches another faint scent: herbs, dried and crumbling, tucked into corners of the room. Women often hung bunches of rosemary or thyme not only for cooking, but in the hope that their sharp fragrance might cut through the miasma. Whether it helped is doubtful, but the gesture itself speaks volumes, an attempt to impose freshness where there was none. And still, scholars remain divided on how much peasants noticed these odors. Some argue that constant exposure dulled their sensitivity, that smoke and dung became invisible to the senses. Others believe peasants remarked upon them frequently, perhaps even joked or sang about the stench, using humor to soften discomfort. You, lying there in the dark, can't help but notice every whiff. But perhaps after a lifetime of the same air, you too would cease to notice. The smell is not uniform. It shifts as people move. A blanket stirs, releasing a puff of stale sweat. A goat stretches, and the musk of animal fur drifts closer. The fire spits, and the brief tang of scorched wood overlays everything else. These scents form layers, like a rough perfume of survival. Each has its own place, its own rhythm, its own way of declaring, life is still here even in the coldest night. A rather eccentric practice sometimes occurred on winter evenings. Families burned certain herbs or resins, not just for fragrance, but for supposed protective power. Juniper, in particular, was thought to ward off evil spirits. Tonight, no such pleasant smoke drifts through your hut, but you can imagine how it must have felt to have even a fleeting moment of pine-scented relief amidst the staleness. Your skin itches from the air, and you shift uneasily. The blanket carries its own musty scent, and when you bury your nose in it for warmth, the heaviness makes your stomach churn. You think of the way your modern self might complain about a faint odor in a hotel room, and you smile wryly. Here, you would not last long. The smell also shapes how people dream. Nightmares often mingle with sensation, and peasants described visions of choking, of suffocating smoke, of beasts pressing close. Was it imagination, or simply the mind's way of explaining the odors pressing in all night? Historians debate whether such sensory overload influenced medieval beliefs about demons and restless spirits. You wonder if, in their minds, the suffocating stench itself became a kind of invisible ghost that haunted every winter night. You close your eyes again, and for a moment, the smells recede. Your brain adapts, numbs itself to survive. A child sighs, a pig snorts softly, and the smoky sweetness of peat once again dominates the air. Oddly enough, you find comfort in its consistency. It is unpleasant, yes, but it is also familiar, steady, reliable. In a world where frost threatens death and hunger lurks, familiarity itself is a kind of safety. The hut groans against the wind, and smoke thickens again near the rafters. You turn on your side, pulling the blanket closer, and surrender once more. The smell of survival, harsh and tangled, cradles you as firmly as wool or straw. You lie awake again, and this time your ears lead the way. Close your eyes and listen. The winter night is not silent, though at first it may seem so. It is a tapestry of sounds, some soothing, some unsettling, all woven into the rhythm of peasant sleep. Evidence from chronicles and songs of the time reminds us that medieval nights in rural cottages were punctuated by constant noise. The first you notice is the chorus of breathing. Dozens of lungs draw in the smoky air and exhale it back, a symphony of snores, sighs, and muffled coughs. Your father rumbles low in his throat, your brother wheezes faintly, and your sister lets out soft little whistles through her nose. The hut becomes a living instrument, its music rough but oddly comforting. Then comes the crackle of the fire. Even in its dying state, it has a voice pops, snaps, tiny hisses as moisture burns out of the wood. Each sound reminds you that the embers still hold life. In the quiet, those sparks feel louder, like punctuation marks in the night. You tilt your head and listen to them scatter, like rain hitting stone. An unusual detail found in some folk tales is that people often spoke of houses themselves groaning in the cold. Tonight you hear it clearly. The timbers of the hut contract with the frost, creaking as if sighing under the weight of snow. The sound seems almost human low, aching, alive. You wonder if, centuries ago, families whispered that their huts had spirits muttering in the dark. Suddenly, a chicken flutters in its corner, and you hear the rush of feathers, followed by silence again. The goat shifts its hooves, scraping against the floor, and the pig snorts as if answering. These animal sounds blend seamlessly with human ones. To modern ears it might seem chaotic, but for you, it feels natural companions sharing the same frozen night. From outside, faint noises drift in. The wind pushes against the walls, moaning like a restless ghost. Sometimes it finds a crack and whistles sharply, a needle of sound cutting into the hut. You hold your blanket tighter. The memory of wolves prowling nearby lingers in the back of your mind. Tonight, it is only the wind, but you listen carefully, knowing that nature has many voices. Not all scholars agree on just how noisy medieval nights were. Some argue that without machinery or modern traffic, they were eerily silent except for wind and fire. Others, studying the closeness of humans and animals, believe the nights were never still, always filled with the constant shuffle of bodies. Lying here, ears tuned to every sound, you feel the latter more true. Silence never comes. It is always layered with life. And there are the human whispers. Before drifting fully into slumber, families sometimes exchange soft words in the dark. A prayer murmured, a question about tomorrow's chores, a half-joking complaint about someone's snoring. These fragments of conversation float in the night, woven into the soundscape, and then fade as sleep takes over. You catch your mother's voice now, humming a faint lullaby to the youngest. It is cracked, weary, but sweet, like a thread tying the family together against the dark. Another sound breaks through coughing, deep, rough, drawn out. Your grandfather wheezes in the corner, each breath rattling like loose sticks. Illness lingers in winter, and the cough feels like a metronome, reminding everyone of fragility. It echoes until it merges again with the rhythm of sleep. Curiously enough, some medieval texts describe peasants telling time by these night sounds. The cock's accidental crowing, the cracking of frozen beams, the changing patterns of snoring, all hints of the hour passing. With no clocks in the hut, sound itself becomes a measure of the night. You shift, and your ear presses closer to the straw. Even the bedding has a voice, crackling softly as it adjusts under your weight. A flea hops, invisible but audible, as the scratching of a sibling sets the straw rustling. The quietest sounds suddenly feel magnified in this cramped space. You reflect for a moment. Could you sleep through this symphony? In your modern home, the hum of a refrigerator might disturb you, yet here, the uneven music of breath, cough, crackle, and wind becomes a lullaby. Your body, pressed close to others, begins to surrender. The noises no longer jar you. They fold into the rhythm of rest. Still, part of you remains alert. The creak of the door, the howl of a wolf, even a louder crack from the fire could jolt you awake in fear. And perhaps that's why medieval sleep was lighter, more broken, more vigilant. Experts still debate whether peasants achieved the deep, uninterrupted slumber we crave today, or whether they floated in a state between waking and dreaming, always half ready for danger. The fire snaps once more, sending a tiny echo through the room. Your sister sighs and turns, her hair brushing your cheek. The pig grunts softly, settling deeper into straw. And outside, the wind continues its mournful song, as if the whole night were an orchestra designed to test your patience, yet soothe you at the same time. As your own eyelids grow heavier, you realize that these sounds, raw, imperfect, layered, are the heartbeat of survival. They remind you that you are not alone. Even in the deepest darkness, life hums and whispers all around you, refusing to let silence become despair. And with that thought, you drift again, carried on the uneven lullaby of a medieval winter night. Your body aches when you turn, and beneath you the straw pricks your skin through the thin layer of linen. You are reminded once again that medieval peasants did not have mattresses in the sense you might imagine. Instead, they relied on pallets stuffed with straw, reeds, or rushes, whatever the season and the harvest allowed. Each rustle as you move becomes part of the experience, the dry stalks shifting like a restless creature. It is clear from inventories and surviving wills that peasants treasured even these humble pallets. A straw bed might sound disposable, but it was, in fact, an annual necessity. Straw was replaced when it grew too foul, too flat, or too infested. Families spread fresh cuttings after harvest, relishing the brief comfort of crisp stalks before months of wear ground them into dust. Tonight, your palate is old. The straw crunches faintly, its edges stiff and sharp, and you cannot escape the itch crawling along your calves. You run your hand along the bedding. The fabric covering it is rough, patched many times. There are gaps where straw pokes through, scratching your fingers. You shift again, sighing, and the smell rises, a mixture of earth, mold, and something slightly sour. Imagine sleeping each night on last summer's field, trapped in your cottage, the residue of the harvest beneath you. An unusual custom from certain regions was the sprinkling of herbs into the straw: lavender, thyme, or mint if available. These herbs did not just sweeten the air, but were believed to repel fleas and lice. You catch a faint whiff of something sharper than straw tonight, perhaps crushed rosemary mingled with the bedding. Whether it truly deters pests or merely perfumes their presence, you can't decide. Still, the thought that someone tried to soften this harsh bed with fragrance touches you. Not all historians agree on how often peasants refreshed their bedding. Some argue that it was done only once a year, after harvest, leaving families to endure stale, flattened straw for months. Others suggest a more frequent change when conditions allowed. The truth probably varied. Wealthy peasants might replace it more often, while the poorest endured until the straw turned to dust. For you, the sensation is unmistakable. The straw has long passed its freshness, and your back protests with every shift. The pallet itself rests on the ground, sometimes directly, sometimes raised slightly by a wooden frame or ropes. Tonight you are on the floor, and you can feel the chill creeping upward through the earth. Your hip digs into a hard clump of soil beneath the bedding, and you pull your blanket tighter. The cold floor is a thief, leaching warmth despite every effort to trap it. You imagine for a moment, lying on a feather mattress, like the nobles in their stone keeps, softness enveloping you, clean linen changed regularly, perfumes masking all odors. The contrast feels almost cruel. Yet, you also imagine the weight of isolation in those castles, where one or two people might sleep in silence, far from the chatter of siblings and the grunt of animals. Here, on scratchy straw, you are crowded, itchy, and sore, but never alone. Your brother groans beside you, shifting, and you know he too feels the straw poking at his side. He scratches, curses softly under his breath, then settles again. The sound is familiar, part of the nightly routine. Everyone endures it together, and in that shared endurance lies a kind of comfort. Curiously enough, straw bedding carried symbolic weight too. In some folk traditions, new brides were laid on fresh straw as a symbol of fertility, connecting them to the fields that sustained life. So while tonight your bed feels like a nest of thorns, it also carries echoes of sacred meaning: life, death, and birth, all tied to the humble stalks beneath you. You press your cheek into the bedding, and tiny fragments tickle your nose. You sneeze, muffling it under your blanket, and your sister stirs. She pulls the covering tighter, muttering in her sleep. The sneeze lingers in your chest, the straw's dust a constant irritant. Yet, even as you curse the discomfort, you recognize that this is the only option. The ground without straw would be colder, harder, less forgiving. At least the straw offers a cushion, however prickly. Some researchers speculate that the act of replacing straw each year became a small moment of joy, a ritual of renewal. Picture the family scattering fresh golden stalks across the floor, laughing at the crackle, enjoying for a short time the feeling of cleanliness. That moment is long past for you. Tonight, you make do with what remains, flattened stalks that no longer crunch but sigh under your weight. You close your eyes again, adjusting to the constant itch. The sound of straw becomes rhythmic, a soft rustling whenever someone moves, like whispers in the dark. Strangely, it begins to soothe you. The discomfort never disappears, but it becomes part of the night's fabric, just as much as the coughs, the snores, and the crackling fire. And as you drift once more, you reflect on how easily the human body adapts. What feels intolerable at first becomes background. What scratches and itches eventually fades into the rhythm of sleep. Your bed of straw is no palace, no feather mattress, no silken sheet. It is simply enough to hold you above the cold earth, enough to remind you of the harvest, enough to carry you through one more winter night. You stir again, though not because of the straw this time. The night has its own rhythm, and your body follows it even without your command. You wake halfway, eyes heavy but mind alert, and realize something curious. In the medieval world, people rarely slept in one long stretch as you do now. Instead, the night often came in two halves, what many call the two-sleep rhythm. Contemporary writings, from medical treatises to sermons, reveal that broken sleep was not considered strange but entirely natural. The first sleep would last a few hours, heavy and deep, carrying you from evening until midnight. Then came a period of wakefulness, sometimes lasting an hour or two, before people settled into their second sleep until dawn. Tonight, you find yourself in that in-between moment, blinking at the dim glow of embers, your body both weary and oddly restless. The reasons were practical. Without artificial light, winter nights stretched endlessly long, sometimes 14 hours of darkness. Few could sleep straight through. Your body, pressed between siblings and blankets, stirs after several hours, as if demanding a change. Around you, you sense the same in others, a shifting of bodies, a cough, the murmur of someone speaking softly into the gloom. An odd practice reported in old court records was how peasants sometimes used this midnight interval. Some rose quietly to tend animals, to add wood to the fire, or even to visit neighbors in the pitch dark, guided only by the moon. Others prayed, whispering their devotions while the rest of the family dozed. You can imagine your mother's lips moving silently, fingers drawing a small cross in the air, the gesture barely visible in the faint light. But the waking was not always solemn. Sometimes it was lively. Couples might steal a few moments of intimacy during this interval, their whispers drowned by the snores of children. Others told stories, gossiping or trading news from the day. The hut, crowded and smoky, became briefly animated, alive with murmurs and rustling before quiet returned. You hear it now, your father shifting, perhaps to add peat to the fire, and your brother scratching as he whispers some joke, half asleep, to no one in particular. There is debate among scholars as to whether this segmented sleep was universal. Some argue it was a widespread pattern across Europe, while others believe it depended on latitude, season, or custom. You, lying here in the cold dark, feel certain that the long winter nights made it inevitable. How else could the body endure such endless darkness except by breaking it into manageable pieces? You shift, sitting up slightly. The embers glow faintly, painting the walls with dull orange streaks. Around you, others lie still, though you hear occasional sighs and coughs. The animals stir too, the pig gives a brief grunt, and a chicken clucks drowsily. It feels as though the entire hut breathes in unison, then pauses, caught in this middle state between waking and sleeping. You rub your eyes. The smoke makes them sting, but your mind is oddly alert. In another world, you might reach for a book, scroll through a glowing screen, distract yourself with noise. Here, you have only your thoughts. And perhaps that is why peasants describe this hour as a time of reflection. Some confessed their worries, others planned the next day's work, still others whispered prayers for spring. Tonight, you find yourself imagining the dawn, how the snow outside will glisten pale blue before the sun rises. Curiously enough, medical writers of the time sometimes even recommended this break in sleep as healthy. They believed the body's natural rhythm required it. A physician might advise a patient to use the interval for meditation or quiet conversation, trusting that the second sleep would come easily afterward. And indeed, as you lie back again, stretching slightly, you feel the pull of drowsiness already returning. Your sister stirs, rolling over, her hair brushing your face. She mumbles something incomprehensible, then sighs deeply. You smile in the dark. Even this moment, so ordinary, so unremarkable, carries a kind of intimacy. You are all caught in the same rhythm, sharing not just space but time itself, waking and sleeping together in cycles as old as the seasons. Experts continue to debate what ended this two-sleep rhythm. Some point to the arrival of artificial light candles, then lamps, then electricity gradually compressing the night into a single block of rest. Others suggest social change, the demands of factory work in later centuries, the scheduling of hours, the discipline of modern time. Whatever the cause, your body here still obeys the older rhythm, and you surrender to it naturally. Your head sinks back onto the straw. The embers glow faintly, a pulse in the dark. Around you, the murmurs fade, replaced again by steady breathing. The second sleep creeps in like mist, softening every edge. Soon you will be carried once more into dreams, your body warmed by family, your mind lulled by smoke and silence. And as you drift, you reflect on the strangeness of your own world, where 8 hours of unbroken sleep is demanded, monitored, even measured by glowing devices. Here, there is no such rigidity. Sleep is fluid, broken, shared with whispers and pauses, as flexible as the long nights demand. You close your eyes, surrendering to the second tide, and let yourself be carried onward into the medieval dark. You stir in that fragile space between the first and second sleep, your mind lingering in half-dreams, when a sudden awareness brushes your skin, not the cold, not the straw, but the feeling of unseen eyes. It is not only animals and family that haunt the medieval night. For many peasants, the darkness brimmed with dangers both physical and supernatural, and people often turn to charms and prayers to guard themselves against spirits. We know from parish records and folklore collections that ordinary families filled their homes with small acts of protection before lying down. A cross carved crudely into the lintel, a sprig of rowan or juniper above the doorway, a whispered "Pater Noster" before eyes closed. These rituals were woven into the nightly routine as firmly as banking the fire or pulling up the covers. Tonight, you catch your mother's lips moving silently, her fingers tracing a cross over the youngest child's forehead. Whether it is faith, habit, or fear, you cannot say, but it settles the room. The belief in spirits was not an abstract superstition. It was immediate, tangible, and frightening. The dark corners of the hut seemed alive with shadows. Outside, the howl of the wind might be mistaken for a banshee's wail. A creaking beam could become a restless soul shifting in the rafters. Children, in particular, were told to close their eyes quickly, lest wandering spirits slip into their dreams. You feel your sister bury her face against your shoulder, and you know she is still afraid of such tales. An unusual protective measure, found in a handful of folk traditions, involved scattering salt on the threshold or drawing protective circles with chalk or ash. Tonight, you imagine a faint line of ash smudged near the door, meant to confuse or repel anything unwelcome. It is a flimsy barrier against wolves, let alone spirits, but the act itself feels calming, as though a fragile net of safety has been cast over the family. Not every historian interprets these fears the same way. Some argue that peasants genuinely believed demons lurked in every corner of the night, while others suggest the rituals were more cultural than literal traditions performed without much thought, like humming a lullaby. The debate continues, but lying here, listening to the creak of wood and the whistle of wind, you realize how easy it is for imagination to fill silence with menace. Your father shifts beside the hearth, muttering a prayer under his breath. His words mingle with the hiss of embers, and you feel oddly reassured. Even your grandfather, with his rattling cough, raises 2 fingers in a sign of the cross before sinking back into his wheezy slumber. These gestures are as much about calming the mind as they are about warding off spirits. The power lies in the act of believing. Curiously enough, some households hung little bells above their doors or windows, thinking the chime would frighten away wandering souls. You strain your ears now, half expecting such a sound, but all you hear is the whistle of the wind and the occasional grunt of a pig. Still, the idea lingers, and you imagine how soothing a tiny chime might feel in this heavy dark. The space between sleep cycles becomes a vulnerable hour. Dreams linger, fears rise, and the mind plays tricks. Children might wake crying, claiming they saw a figure in the corner, or felt a hand touch their face. Adults would soothe them with prayers, perhaps sprinkle holy water if it was available. Tonight, your youngest sibling stirs, whimpers, and your mother immediately strokes his head, whispering assurances. You watch, reminded that comfort itself is a charm. Experts continue to debate whether such nightly fears were exaggerated in later retellings, or whether medieval villagers truly lived in terror of demons each night. But one thing is clear: the rituals themselves mattered deeply. They provided structure, a sense of control, in a world where disease, famine, and wolves felt unstoppable. A whispered prayer before sleep might not drive away spirits, but it gave courage to close one's eyes. You turn over, pulling the blanket closer. The shadows seem thicker now, but the fire's faint glow pushes them back just enough. You exhale slowly, letting the mixture of smoke and breath carry away your unease. Your mind relaxes as you remind yourself that the people around you, family, animals, even the creaking hut, are real, solid, protective. Whatever spirits may linger in the dark cannot match the warmth of shared breath and touch. A rooster outside gives a confused, half-hearted crow, too early by hours. You smile faintly in the dark. Perhaps the bird, too, keeps watch, reminding you that dawn will eventually come. The night is long, yes, but not endless. And so, with a final glance toward the ember-lit hearth, you close your eyes, whisper a wordless prayer of your own, and let yourself sink again into the waiting arms of second sleep. Your eyes close again, yet your body still hums with a restless energy. The smoky air makes your throat dry, and your belly growls faintly. You remember what filled it before bed: a rough crust of bread, perhaps a ladle of thin pottage, and, if fortune smiled, a cup of ale. For peasants, drink was not merely a pleasure but a necessity, and in winter nights it often shaped the very nature of sleep. It is clear from surviving accounts and brewing records that ale and mead were staples of the medieval diet. Water, often unsafe, was not always trusted. Instead, households relied on weak ale, sometimes called small beer, brewed thick and cloudy, barely alcoholic but filling. On feast days or when luck brought honey, mead offered a stronger warmth, sweet and intoxicating. Tonight, you recall the heavy cup you drank before curling under blankets. Its warmth still lingers in your chest, dulling the gnaw of hunger. The effect on sleep is unmistakable. Your eyelids grow heavier, your limbs sink deeper into the straw. The dizziness is not unpleasant, it is like being rocked by unseen hands, coaxed into rest. Families often drank together before bed, even children, since the weak ale posed little danger, but carried calories and a calming effect. You feel that comfort now, the edge taken off by the thick brew that swirled like liquid bread in your cup. Curiously enough, some households left a bit of ale at the bedside in winter, believing it could soothe a cough in the night or ward off thirst. You imagine your father reaching for the small jug near the hearth, taking a swallow before muttering a prayer and returning to slumber. The faint scent of hops and malt hangs in the air, mingling with smoke and sweat. Yet, scholars remain divided on how much alcohol influenced the rhythm of medieval rest. Some argue that weak ale had little effect beyond nourishment, while others suggest the heavier brews, especially in winter, carried people into a deeper, more drugged sleep. Lying here, limbs heavy and mind drowsy, you feel inclined to side with the latter. The ale hums through your veins, nudging you further into unconsciousness. Your brother mutters beside you, words slurred by half-sleep. You catch fragments about oxen and snow, perhaps the remnants of a dream shaped by food and drink. Dreams often bloomed richer after ale, carrying images both strange and vivid. You wonder if the peasants believed those dreams held meaning. Some did, recording them as signs or warnings. Others dismissed them as the tricks of drink. For you, the images already gather. A fire glowing brighter than it should, fields of barley bending in the wind, a jug endlessly refilling. Not every evening allowed for such indulgence. In lean winters, ale might run thin, the barrels nearly empty by mid-season. Families watered it down, stretched it, prayed for the next brewing. Tonight, you are fortunate. The taste still lingers faintly on your lips, but you know that as the weeks drag on, the cup will feel lighter until it offers only the memory of comfort. One eccentric custom described in some rural regions was drinking a spiced ale on coldest nights, flavoured with ginger or cinnamon if such luxuries could be obtained. It was thought to warm the body more thoroughly, to drive winter from the bones. You smile at the idea, though in this hut, the taste of spice is a rarity reserved for tales rather than reality. Your father shifts and lets out a long sigh. Perhaps the ale in his belly weighs heavily, pressing him deeper into sleep. His snores grow louder, rattling the straw, while your mother murmurs something in annoyance before turning away. You smile in the dark. Even in centuries past, the complaints about snoring remained the same. You think about how your world treats drink warnings, measurements, advice from doctors about moderation. Here, moderation is built in, for the ale itself is weak, its purpose more sustenance than celebration. And yet, on nights like this, when the fire burns low and the cold prowls outside, its gift is undeniable. It softens the edges, blurs the discomfort, lulls you toward peace. Experts sometimes argue about whether medieval peasants truly felt relaxed by such drink, or if modern minds simply imagine it. But as your eyes droop again, as warmth spreads lazily from your chest outward, you know that tonight, the ale has done its work. It has given you the gift of sleep, heavy and dream-filled, carrying you into the second stretch of night. Your head sinks deeper into the straw, the prickles forgotten for now. The snores around you blend into a steady hum. You let go, surrendering to the thick pull of slumber, your last thought a faint taste of malt on your tongue, and the comforting illusion that the cold has receded, at least for a little while. The ale's warmth lingers as your mind drifts further, and soon you are no longer aware of the straw, the smoke, or the snores. Instead, visions stir behind your closed eyelids, shapes both familiar and strange, woven together in the way only dreams can manage. For peasants enduring the cold, dreams were not idle fantasies. They were powerful, sometimes frightening, and often shared aloud come morning. From sermons and confessional manuals, we know that medieval people thought dreams might carry messages, warnings, or glimpses of the divine. Some clergy preached that God could speak through visions at night, while others cautioned that demons twisted dreams into temptation. Tonight, as you drift between wakefulness and slumber, you feel the weight of both possibilities. Your dream begins in a field, bright and green despite the snow outside. You hear the bleating of goats and the laughter of children, yet the ground is warm beneath your bare feet. The contrast makes no sense, but your mind accepts it. Dreams often blurred seasons and places, stitching fragments of memory with longing. For peasants who spent long winters trapped indoors, dreams of summer fields must have been common, a reprieve carried in sleep. Curiously enough, folk tales describe dreams shaped by hunger. People spoke of banquets, of bread loaves stacked high, of rivers running with milk. Your own stomach, still empty despite the ale, now imagines steaming stews and roasted meat. You reach for them in your dream, but they dissolve, leaving only smoke and the sound of your brother coughing in the real world. Hunger has slipped into your visions, teasing you cruelly. And then the darker edge arrives. Shadows lengthen, and the warm field fades. A figure lingers at the edge of your sight, tall and faceless, watching, Children in the corner of the hut sometimes wake, shrieking from dreams like this, convinced the devil himself had visited. Some historians suggest these night terrors came from smoke-induced suffocation or the restless mind of broken sleep. Others argue that people genuinely believe demons crept through dreams to steal souls. Lying here, half lost in fear, you understand why such explanations took root. The dream shifts again now. You see your family huddled around the hearth, but they do not breathe. The fire glows, yet no one moves. Panic seizes you, and you reach out, but your hand passes through them like mist. The shock jolts you awake, heart hammering, breath ragged in the smoky air. You realize you are safe, pressed between your siblings, but the dream clings like cobwebs. Your sister stirs beside you, mumbling in her sleep, perhaps caught in her own vision. You listen to her whimper and then quiet, soothed by the weight of blankets. In the morning, she might tell you of some fantastical animal, or of running barefoot through the snow, and the family will nod, perhaps laugh, perhaps nod gravely if her dream sounds like an omen. Dreams are never dismissed outright, they are dissected, interpreted, sometimes feared. Not all scholars agree on how seriously peasants took such visions. Some argue they were central to medieval thought, shaping daily choices. Others believe they were shared more as stories than guides, entertaining chatter before work. The truth, you suspect, lies in between. Dreams carried weight when they echoed fear or hope, but they could also be mere curiosities. A rather eccentric detail recorded in a handful of manuscripts is that people sometimes kept a dream herb under their pillows, mugwort, thought to invite prophetic visions. Whether it worked or not, the ritual reveals how strongly they linked sleep to meaning. Tonight, you wonder if some unseen herb influenced the strange mixture of summer fields and faceless shadows that filled your mind. You breathe slowly, calming your heart, and close your eyes once more. The dream lingers faintly, but the rhythm of snores around you pulls you back into rest. Soon, new visions gather, less frightening this time. You see flickers of light, perhaps torches at a festival, hear laughter that echoes like bells. It is not real, yet it feels as solid as the straw beneath you. In the medieval night, dreams were not only personal but communal. People shared them, argued over them, wove them into folk tales. Perhaps tomorrow your dream of silent family and glowing fire will become part of such talk, interpreted as a warning to guard the hearth more carefully. Or perhaps it will be dismissed as the result of too much ale. Either way, the dream will not vanish. It will become another thread in the fabric of winter nights. And with that thought, your body loosens, your mind softens, and you surrender once again. The dreams return, less sharp, more gentle, weaving comfort instead of fear. For a while, even in the heart of winter, you live in a world shaped not by hunger or cold, but by visions stitched from longing, faith, and imagination. You wake with a start as a small body wriggles against you. It is your youngest sibling, pressed tightly to your side, bundled in so many cloths that only a tuft of hair peeks out. In the harsh winters, children were the most vulnerable sleepers. Their bodies cooled quickly, their breath came in fragile wisps, and their survival often depended on how close they were placed to their mothers, or to any warm body that could shield them from the cold. We know from parish records that infant mortality soared in winter months. Cold claimed lives silently, without drama, simply by stealing breath from small lungs during the long nights. To counter this, families placed children in the center of the bed pile, sandwiched between parents or older siblings, like precious embers hidden in the coals. Tonight, you feel the little one's chilled toes against your hip, and instinctively you press closer, sharing warmth without thinking. The sight, if you could see clearly in the dim light, would move you. A child wrapped in layers of wool scraps, rags, and even strips of fur, bound so tightly that their arms cannot flail free. This swaddling is no gentle modern cloth, but a heavy wrapping, meant to pin the child safely in place. Mothers believed it kept infants warm and straightened their limbs as they grew. Whether or not it worked as intended, the effect in winter was obvious. Every layer added another defense against the cold. Curiously enough, some lullabies from the period reference snow and frost directly, soothing children with promises that spring would return. Imagine a mother humming softly, "Sleep, little one," while the fields lie frozen, her voice cracked from smoke but steady. The tune may not chase away the cold, but it quiets the child's tears, and in this hut, silence is as precious as warmth. Yet, even with such care, dangers lurked. Children suffocated under heavy blankets, or rolled too near the hearth, or were crushed in crowded beds. Not all scholars agree on how often such tragedies occurred, but legal records show occasional references to overlaying the accidental smothering of infants by exhausted parents in the night. Some priests even warned against too much closeness, urging separate cradles where possible. But for poor families, separate cradles meant colder babies. The risk was a grim calculation. A child could suffocate, yes, but alone on the edge of the room they would surely freeze. You listen to the small child's breath, now thin but steady, and you marvel at the quiet courage of mothers who balanced such choices every night. Your mother reaches out, pulling the bundle closer to her chest, sighing as the warmth seeps into her own weary body. Her eyes flutter closed again, her cheek resting against the child's hair. That gesture is as old as humanity itself, the instinct to shield, to hold, to offer your own body as a barrier against the void. A rather eccentric practice mentioned in some folk accounts was placing heated stones wrapped in cloth beside a child, a primitive hot water bottle of sorts. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes the stones cracked or burned through fabric, leaving scars. You picture a mother's anxious hands tonight, checking the cooling stone near her infant, making sure it hasn't slipped. Every trick mattered when life itself wavered in the balance. The cold does not pity children. Their cries carry through the night more easily than adult groans, sharp and high-pitched, sometimes waking the whole room. You remember winters past when hunger added to their misery, when there was no milk for nursing, no broth to warm them. Those nights stretched endlessly, filled with wailing that pierced even the haze of sleep. Tonight, though, the child beside you is quiet, drifting back into slumber, his small hand twitching in dreams. Scholars still discuss whether peasants considered children's lives as fragile and precious as modern parents do, or whether high mortality hardened them into resignation. Some argue that each infant was cherished fiercely, while others suggest that emotional distance became a shield against inevitable loss. You, lying here, cannot imagine detachment. The sight of your mother's arm curled protectively, the way everyone adjusts their bodies to leave space for the child, tells you that love was as present as fear. Your brother coughs, rolling over, and the little one stirs again. You hush him instinctively, though no words leave your lips, only a low hum. You feel the child's body relax against yours, tiny breaths resuming their rhythm. The act of protecting, of offering even a fraction of your warmth, fills you with a strange calm. Perhaps this is what binds families together through such brutal seasons, not just necessity, but tenderness. And as you close your eyes once more, the weight of the child's presence comforts you. His warmth may be slight, his life fragile, but in that fragile spark lies a promise, that winter will not claim everyone, that some will endure to see spring. In the hush of the hut, where the wind howls outside and the fire sighs low, the sound of a child's steady breathing becomes the purest lullaby of all. The little one's breathing steadies, and soon you sense another presence across the room, the slow, measured rhythm of your grandfather's breath. It rattles, harsh and uneven, yet it carries an authority all its own. In these winter nights, the role of elders becomes clear. They are anchors in the darkness, keepers of memory, and often the ones who claim the warmest corner of the room. It is well recorded in household accounts that older family members were treated with a mixture of reverence and practicality. Their bodies, frail and aching, could not endure the draughts that younger ones might shrug off. So, The best spot, often nearest to the hearth, was reserved for them. Tonight, you glance toward that corner and see the outline of your grandfather beneath a heavy sheepskin, his face glowing faintly in the ember light. His place by the fire is not luxury but necessity. Without it, he would not last the winter. And yet, elders gave something back in return. When sleep was thin, their voices carried stories into the dark. A cough interrupts him now, but soon you hear a low murmur, half a prayer, half a tale. He recalls a winter from his youth, when the snow piled so high that even the church door froze shut. His words are slow, halting, but they drift through the room, weaving memory into the night. Curiously enough, some ethnographers note that old men and women in medieval villages were thought to hold a special closeness to the spiritual world. Because they were nearer death, their dreams and stories carried more weight. Children listened wide-eyed, believing that a cough between tales might conceal a prophecy. Tonight, your grandfather's voice sounds both weary and sacred, every rasp a reminder of the thin line between survival and passing on. Of course, historians remain divided on whether elders always enjoyed such respect. Some argue that poverty strained families, leaving little room for sentiment when food and blankets were scarce. There are accounts of older relatives being left to the cold when resources failed. Others counter that kinship bonds were strong, and that even in deprivation, elders were cared for. Here in your hut, the evidence is simple. Your grandfather lies closest to the embers, guarded like a fragile flame. You listen as he clears his throat again. The smoke makes him cough, but he does not stop speaking. He tells of wolves howling in the night long ago, of neighbors huddling together for warmth, of bread so hard it had to be broken with an axe. The children shift in their blankets, half asleep but still listening. Stories like these are not just entertainment, they are survival lessons, reminders of what has been endured before. An eccentric custom mentioned in some rural traditions was the placing of a wise elder near the animals in the hut. Their presence was thought to calm the beasts, to keep them from panicking in the night. Whether that belief was practical or mystical, you cannot say, but tonight you notice how the goats rest quietly, as if soothed by the steady rumble of your grandfather's voice. The ember light flickers across his face, carving deep lines into his features. Each wrinkle seems a map of winters past, each grey hair a testament to survival. You realize that to the children, he is living proof that one can outlast the cold, that one can grow old even in a world so harsh. That sight alone becomes a form of comfort, as warming as the sheepskin pulled over his chest. And yet, you also feel the weight of fragility. His breaths come slower, his coughs deeper. You know that each winter threatens to be his last. The family watches without saying it aloud, adjusting blankets, feeding him the choicest morsels, stoking the fire nearer his corner. Care becomes ritual, as sacred as prayer. Scholars sometimes debate whether medieval families saw age as a blessing or a burden. The records are contradictory. Some show reverence, others neglect. But within the smoky walls of your hut, the truth feels less abstract. It is both. Your grandfather is frail, needing protection, and yet his presence shields the family in ways no blanket can. His stories remind you of continuity. His cough warns you of fragility. His quiet resilience teaches you patience. You shift in the straw, listening as his tail trails off into mutters, then silence. Soon his breath steadies again, rasping but regular. The room quiets with him, as though the hut itself takes comfort in his rest. Outside, the wind claws at the walls, but inside, his presence steadies the night like a weight that keeps the family grounded. You pull your blanket tighter, eyes drifting shut, warmed not by fire or ale this time, but by the simple knowledge that generations surround you. On one side, the fragile breath of a child. On the other, the laboured sighs of an elder. Between them, the whole arc of life unfolds beneath one roof, surviving together through the longest winter night. The quiet doesn't last long. Soon there's a sound you cannot mistake, the scratching of nails against skin, the restless rustle of straw. It is not the wind, nor the animals. It is your brother, wriggling and muttering, driven half mad by the invisible tormentors that share your bed, lice, fleas, and bedbugs. In truth, the medieval night was as much about enduring pests as it was about enduring cold. We know from medical tracts and even casual complaints in court records that vermin were a constant presence in peasant homes. Lice nested in unwashed hair and woolen garments. Fleas lived in the straw bedding, biting as soon as bodies warmed the nest. Bedbugs crawled from cracks in wooden frames or walls, leaving trails of red welts. Tonight, you feel the sting yourself sharp, fleeting, followed by the irresistible urge to scratch. You resist at first, then give in, nails dragging across your forearm until the itch eases. An unusual detail emerges in medieval housekeeping guides. Some families scattered herbs like pennyroyal or tansy into their bedding, hoping to repel pests with the strong smell. You sniff the air and catch only faint rosemary from earlier, but the fleas pay no attention. Their kingdom belongs here, and they reign freely in the dark. Not all historians agree on how much peasants suffered from these tiny invaders. Some suggest they were accepted as a fact of life, hardly noticed after a lifetime of itching. Others believe the annoyance was constant, shaping sleep and health alike. You, lying in the straw, cannot imagine ignoring the sharp bite on your ankle, nor the tickle at your scalp that keeps you from drifting fully into rest. Your sister whimpers, scratching at her arms even in sleep. She murmurs, half dreaming, half awake, and turns over violently, shaking straw from her blanket. A flea leaps to your wrist, and you flick it away in disgust. In the smoky dimness, the pests are invisible, yet their presence is undeniable. Some remedies were more desperate. Peasants rubbed their skin with grease mixed with ashes, hoping the slick coating would smother lice. Others bathed rarely, plunging into icy rivers only in summer, and so infestations flourished. You imagine the scratching that echoed through huts each night, a background noise as common as snoring. Even your grandfather's cough pauses now and then for the scrape of nails across his thinning hair. Curiously enough, one chronicler mocked peasants for sharing their beds with legions of God's smallest creatures. His disdain drips from the page, but you wonder if nobles were truly exempt. After all, even kings slept beneath canopies that sometimes crawled with vermin. Perhaps wealth softened many burdens, but pests showed little respect for rank. The danger was not only irritation. Flea bites opened skin, lice spread fevers, and filth provided fertile ground for disease. Though no one in this hut can imagine it, centuries later fleas would be blamed for carrying plague. Tonight, they are merely tormentors, driving families to scratch until they bleed. Your ankle throbs where you've torn skin, but there is no remedy, only endurance. Scholars still debate how peasants interpreted these nightly torments. Were they seen as punishment, as divine trial, or as simple nuisance? Some folk tales treat lice as symbols of poverty, while others oddly praise them as reminders of humility. For you, there is no symbolism, only discomfort. You pull the blanket tighter, hoping to trap warmth and pests alike, though you know it makes little difference. Your brother mutters in frustration, finally sitting up to scratch furiously at his scalp. He sighs, exhausted, and collapses again, disturbing the straw with a loud crunch. The sound wakes the pig in the corner, which snorts before settling again. For a moment, everyone shifts, restless, scratching in their sleep, until quiet slowly returns. The straw rustles again under your shoulder, and you feel another itch building. You smile bitterly, realizing that sleep here is always conditional. Even if the fire burns, even if blankets hold, even if spirits stay away, there are always small teeth in the dark. Yet, the resilience of peasants shows in how quickly the hut calms once more. Scratching fades, sighs return, and soon the chorus of snores resumes, as though nothing had happened. You close your eyes, still itching, still irritated, but too weary to resist the pull of slumber. Tomorrow, you will wake with red marks along your arms, perhaps a swollen bite or two. No one will remark upon it, for everyone bears the same scars. And perhaps that is how they survived these endless winters, not by escaping discomfort, but by folding it into the rhythm of life, accepting that even sleep must be shared with pests. The scratching subsides, but another awareness creeps in as you watch the faint glow of the hearth, the uneasy balance between warmth and destruction. Every ember is a gift, but every ember is also a threat. The medieval night was haunted not only by spirits or pests, but by fire itself. The very thing that kept peasants alive could also consume everything they had. It is well attested in manorial records and legal documents that house fires were common in medieval villages. With thatched roofs, timber walls, and dry straw scattered across floors, a single spark could mean catastrophe. Tonight, as you watch a coal crack and spit, landing dangerously close to the bedding, you feel your chest tighten. One careless log, one startled animal, one gust of wind through the door, and the hut could be ablaze in seconds. To guard against this, families develop small rituals of vigilance. Before sleeping, your father carefully pushes the logs deeper into the hearth and covers them with ash, reducing the risk of flying sparks. He places a curved iron screen, bent and rusted, in front of the fire, though it hardly blocks the smoke. The children are told again and again, do not play too close, do not wave straw in the embers, do not throw in damp wood that might explode. These warnings hang in the air like commandments, drilled into memory with every winter. An unusual story passed down in some villages describes people keeping a bucket of water or ale near the hearth, not for drinking, but in case flames leapt where they shouldn't. You glance now and see only a half-empty jug, hardly enough to quench a spark if it spread to the straw. But even the gesture of keeping it there reveals the constant unease. Not all scholars agree on how fearful peasants were of nightly fire. Some argue it was a constant, gnawing dread. Others suggest that people, hardened to risk, accepted it with resignation. The truth, perhaps, lies somewhere in between. Lying here, you realize it is both. Fear flashes bright when a spark flies too far, then dulls into background worry when the night grows still again. The danger is heightened by the presence of animals. The pig snorts, turning over on its straw bed, and for a moment you imagine it blundering too close to the embers, scattering coals with a careless hoof. Chickens flutter suddenly, disturbed by some unseen movement, and feathers drift toward the hearth. Your mother rises slightly, watching, ready to shoo them back before they cause trouble. Even in sleep, vigilance never fully ends. Curiously enough, some folk traditions treated fire as a living creature, demanding respect. People spoke to it, thanked it, or even fed it crumbs of bread to keep it tame. Tonight, as you listen to your father's muttered words while he tends the embers, you wonder if he believes in such ideas, or if it is simply habit passed down from his own parents. Either way, the fire feels alive to you, purring quietly now but capable of roaring into fury. The paradox of fire shapes the rhythm of sleep itself. Families lie close for warmth, yet never entirely relaxed, always half listening for the sound of crackling beyond the ordinary. You shift under the blankets, the itch of straw forgotten for now, and your ears tune in. The hearth whispers softly, steady and safe, but you know how quickly that could change. Some nights, tragedies struck. A spark landed unseen, a roof caught, and by morning nothing remained but ashes. Villages remembered such nights for generations, telling cautionary tales of families who vanished in flames. You picture those stories now, your heart beating faster, and you pull your blanket tighter, as though it could shield you from fire as well as cold. And yet you cannot escape the truth. Without the hearth, you would already be frozen. Its risk is inseparable from its gift. That is the medieval compromise: warmth bought at the price of constant vigilance, safety always conditional. Scholars sometimes debate whether peasants saw this balance as tragic or simply normal. You suspect they did not think in such terms. For them, life was a series of risks endured without complaint. The fire hisses as a log collapses, sending up a brief spray of sparks. Your mother flinches, then relaxes when the embers die quickly. She tucks the blankets tighter around the child beside her and lies back down. Within moments, the hut quiets again, but your mind lingers on the image of flames licking the roof, smoke choking the room, the screams of animals and family alike. It is a fear that never fully leaves you. Still, exhaustion is stronger than anxiety. You listen to the fire's softer crackle, its rhythm returning to a lullaby. You watch the faint glow on the rafters, a reminder that the danger is contained for now. And gradually, despite the knowledge of risk, you let yourself slip back into slumber. Here, in the heart of winter, the fire is both guardian and predator, and like every peasant before you, you accept its double face, knowing that survival depends on learning to trust what could also destroy you. The hut seems calm now, but even in the stillness you hear the sound that never fully disappears: coughing. It rattles from your grandfather's chest, high-pitched from your sister, low and throaty from your father. In the middle of winter, sickness is not an occasional visitor, it is a constant roommate. And night, with its cold draughts and smoky air, is when it makes itself most obvious. From monastic infirmary notes and village death rolls, we know that colds, fevers, and bronchial complaints surged during the harsh months. The air inside cottages was thick with dampness and soot, conditions ripe for inflaming lungs. Tonight, your throat already feels raw, your breath shallow. You wonder if it's the smoke, the fleas, or the creeping illness that has been passing through the family for weeks. You glance toward your mother. Her face glows faintly by the hearth, and even in half-sleep she keeps a cloth tucked under her chin, ready to wipe the noses of children or dampen a fevered brow. This readiness is instinctive, rehearsed through endless winters. You notice the child nearest her sweating under the swaddling, his cheeks flushed, his breathing uneven. She shifts him gently, unwrapping a layer to let the heat escape, then presses her lips to his temple in a silent check. Curiously enough, some families believed that placing onions or garlic beneath pillows could ward off illness, their pungent smell thought to chase away bad humors. You sniff the air now and detect something faintly sharp, not just smoke, but a hint of garlic. Perhaps your mother tucked one beneath the child's bedding earlier, more a prayer than a cure. Not all scholars agree on how peasants understood sickness. Some argue they framed it almost entirely in spiritual terms: punishment, sin, or demonic influence. Others suggest a practical awareness that damp, smoke, and hunger worsened illness, even if they lacked modern medical language. Tonight, you sense both perspectives alive in this room. The prayers whispered over coughs mix with the careful rearranging of blankets, the attempts to position sick children nearer to warmth but not too close to smother. The coughs punctuate the night like bells. Your grandfather hacks again, and your father, half asleep, pats his shoulder. A bucket nearby holds water drawn from the well earlier, its surface frozen into a thin crust of ice. Someone cracks it gently, offering him a sip. He drinks, sighs, and sinks back down, his breath rattling but calmer. A rather eccentric custom, recorded in some rural remedies, involved heating ale with herbs and serving it before bed to soothe coughs. Tonight, the jug by the hearth holds nothing but weak ale, already cooling. You imagine your mother warming it earlier in the evening, adding a sprig of sage if she could spare it, pressing it into her father's hands. The taste may have been bitter, but the warmth alone would ease his throat. The danger, of course, goes far beyond discomfort. In a crowded hut, illness spreads like fire. One child sneezes, and by morning the entire family wheezes. Winter becomes a season of contagion, and rest becomes fragile, broken by the needs of the sick. You turn in the straw, pressing the blanket over your nose, though you know it does little. Your skin prickles with the awareness that you, too, may wake fevered soon. Scholars continue to debate whether medieval peasants distinguished clearly between different illnesses: colds, fevers, ague, or simply winter sickness. The terminology was vague, yet the lived reality was sharp. Tonight, you feel it in every cough, every wheeze, every sigh that drifts through the smoky dark. Names matter little when breath itself comes heavy. And still, life continues around it. Children scratch fleas, animals snort, the fire pops, and over it all the coughing rises and falls like waves. The family does not stop sleeping entirely. They surrender in shifts, drifting in and out, half resting, half listening for the sound of a breath too shallow, a fever too high. You lie awake, eyes closed, feeling your own chest rise and fall. You wonder what it must be like to face these winters year after year, knowing that sickness might carry away the weakest. Perhaps that is why prayer mattered so much, because when no remedy could be trusted, only hope remained. You whisper one yourself now, not in Latin but in the language of desperation. Let the child breathe steady. Let the cough not worsen. Let spring come quickly. Eventually, the rhythm of breathing evens out. The child sighs. Your grandfather drifts into a softer wheeze, and the hut quiets once more. Illness remains, coiled in every chest, but for the moment, sleep resumes. You pull your blanket tighter, coughing lightly into the wool, and let your eyes close again. Tonight, like every night, sleep and sickness share the same bed. And for peasants in winter, rest is not an escape from illness, it is simply the pause between coughs. You shift uneasily on the straw, pulling the rough blanket tighter around your shoulders. The weight of it is familiar, but tonight you notice how thin it has grown in patches, the weave stretched and fraying. For peasants in winter, blankets were not always enough. When cloth was scarce, when wool was too costly, people survived through borrowing, sharing, and inventing ways to stretch the little warmth they had. It is well documented in household records that textiles were among the most precious possessions in a peasant home. A blanket might be listed in a will, handed down like a treasure. Families with a little more wealth might own 2 or 3. The poorest often had none of their own, relying instead on what neighbors could spare. Tonight, as the wind groans outside, you imagine the whispered requests exchanged in daylight. A woman asking to borrow a quilt from her sister. A man offering to trade a sack of grain for a wool covering just to make it through the coldest weeks. Sometimes, instead of owning, people rented warmth. In certain villages, cloth merchants or wealthier households lent out old blankets for a fee. Imagine trudging through snow to collect a ragged but heavier covering, returning it at spring thaw with thanks, and perhaps a few eggs as payment. The notion seems strange to you, but in a world where cloth was labor-intensive and expensive, warmth itself became a commodity. Curiously enough, some folk tales describe villagers gathering in one house, bringing what blankets they had, and piling together for communal sleep. In this way, the strong cloth of one household might spread over 10 bodies, stretched thin but serving all. You picture the scene. Families pressed shoulder to shoulder, wrapped not only in blankets but in obligation, the warmth of kinship doubling the warmth of wool. Not all scholars agree on how widespread these practices were. Some argue that most peasants scraped by with only the cloth produced in their own households, wool spun and woven by wives and daughters. Others insist that textile sharing was common, citing scattered records of disputes over borrowed cloth not returned. Lying here, the truth feels obvious. Survival cared little for ownership. What mattered was whether your skin was shielded from frost when the long night pressed in. You pull at the blanket again, fingers catching on a rough seam where the fabric has been mended. The stitches are crooked, the thread coarse, but the repair holds. You imagine your mother's hands in the daylight, patching scraps together, muttering about the cold as she works. Each repair is not just sewing but hope. One more night the blanket will serve, one more week before it falls to rags. A rather eccentric solution, mentioned in some parish notes, involved using old sacks or even spare clothes as makeshift covers. Grain sacks lined with straw, cloaks spread across bodies, layers upon layers of whatever could be spared. Tonight, you feel the weight of your father's old tunic draped across your legs, repurposed into another layer. Its smell of sweat and peat is strong, but the warmth it provides matters more than comfort. The child near you stirs, tugging at the edge of the blanket, and you instinctively share, pulling less tightly around yourself to give him more. This small redistribution happens constantly in the dark. A tug here, a sigh there, a hand pulling fabric over a sibling's exposed foot. Warmth is borrowed even within the family, an endless silent negotiation. You think of how different your own world is, with closets full of blankets, with soft throws bought cheaply and discarded easily. Here, each scrap carries weight, each repair carries pride. To own a thick wool quilt was to own a future, a shield against nights that could kill, and so peasants guarded them carefully, lending only when obligation demanded, borrowing only when desperation outweighed pride. Scholars still puzzle over the emotional value of textiles in peasant life. Were they seen as symbols of poverty, reminders of hardship, or as lifelines cherished like jewels? Perhaps both. Tonight, as you stroke the rough surface of your blanket, you understand why families named them in their wills. To pass on a blanket was not to pass on comfort, it was to pass on survival. The wind outside claws at the hut, and you burrow deeper. The blanket scratches your cheek, stiff and greasy from years of use, but you hold it tighter. You feel the presence of neighbors beyond the walls, perhaps huddled under borrowed coverings of their own. The village itself becomes one vast quilt, stitched together by acts of lending and sharing, each thread a mark of trust. Your eyes close, heavy again. The borrowed warmth clings to you, imperfect but real. And as you drift back into slumber, you realize that even in the darkest winters, survival was rarely solitary. It was stitched together thread by thread, scrap by scrap, blanket by blanket, woven not only of wool, but of human need and generosity. Your stomach twists faintly as you curl deeper beneath the covers, reminding you of another truth about winter nights. The body never sleeps without being shaped by what has or has not been eaten. In summer and autumn, fields and gardens yielded plenty. But now, in the dead of winter, diets shrink to what can be stored, dried, or salted. Hunger is a companion in the dark, and it shapes how you rest, how you dream, and how you wake. From manorial accounts and seasonal records, we know that peasants' diets during the coldest months narrowed sharply. Bread, coarse and dark, remained the staple, often flavored with whatever grain was available: rye, barley, or oats. Pottage, a thick stew of grains and occasional vegetables, simmered by day and cooled at night. Meat was rare except during holidays. Fish might appear if preserved or if rivers were not entirely frozen. Tonight, the taste of yesterday's pottage still lingers faintly in your mouth. Turnips boiled until soft, beans grown tough in storage, a scrap of salted pork so small it dissolved before you even tasted it. This meager diet seeps into your sleep. Your belly is never quite full, your dreams laced with images of food. You remember what was said earlier, how hunger shaped visions, and you feel it again. Flashes of loaves, bowls of hot broth, roasted meat on a spit. They dance in your mind even as you lie half awake, the absence more powerful than the reality. Curiously enough, some households believed certain foods influenced dreams directly. Cheese, in particular, was thought to provoke wild visions, sometimes prophetic, sometimes disturbing. You laugh inwardly, imagining your brother's mutterings earlier in the night fueled by a bit of aged cheese shared at supper. His dreams of oxen and snow may have been nothing more than the byproduct of a stomach straining against dense curds. Not every historian agrees on how well-fed peasants were in winter. Some paint a picture of constant semi-starvation. Others suggest families usually had enough grain to stretch through to spring, even if meals grew monotonous. The truth likely wavered from year to year. Some winters merely lean, others brutal famines where sleep was broken by cramps of hunger and entire villages mourned. Tonight, You feel the lesser version, an ache that is not deadly but persistent, nudging your body awake when it longs to rest. You turn over, clutching the blanket closer. Your mother sighs beside you, her body thinner this season, her bones more prominent against yours. She shifts and mutters, and you know her sleep is shallow too. For parents, hunger cut deeper. They carried the burden of knowing each crust of bread given to a child meant less for themselves. You can almost hear her thoughts as she drifts in and out of slumber, counting loaves, planning meals, praying the stores will last until the first shoots of spring. A rather eccentric practice, mentioned in some folklore, was eating dried apples or nuts before bed, said to ease hunger enough for dreams to come more gently. If your family had any, they were eaten weeks ago. Instead, you chew faintly on the edge of your blanket, not from hunger but from the restless habit of a body unsatisfied. The fire hisses as your father adds another peat clod, and for a moment the smell of smoke masks the pang in your belly. But when the embers quiet again, the hollow returns. Hunger shapes every sound. The pig's snort reminds you of bacon, the crackle of fire like fat sizzling in a pan. Even your sister's quiet breath beside you makes you think of soup steaming in a clay pot. Scholars often debate whether hunger dulled sleep or deepened it. Some argue that exhaustion carried peasants into heavy slumber regardless, while others suggest hunger kept bodies restless, twisting and turning through the night. You find yourself caught between both. Sometimes your limbs feel like lead, sometimes you twitch and wake, your stomach complaining. Sleep becomes uneven, not a gift freely given, but a bargain struck with a body that never forgets its needs. You roll onto your back and look toward the rafters. Darkness presses there, but you imagine the granary in the corner of the village, sacks growing lighter each week. You wonder if the stores will last, if the neighbors will share, if famine will come. Such thoughts thread themselves into your rest, a background hum of worry. Even when you close your eyes, they continue, turning dreams into anxious riddles. And yet, hunger also forges solidarity. When everyone aches, no one feels entirely alone. Families huddle tighter, share the smallest morsels, murmur comfort in the night. Your mother whispers something soft now, words you cannot make out, but you know they are meant for all of you, promises that tomorrow there will still be bread, that spring will not forget to return. Slowly, despite the emptiness in your stomach, your eyes droop again. Hunger has shaped your sleep, your dreams, your body's restlessness, but exhaustion finally wins. You drift into shallow slumber, clutching the memory of food in your mind as tightly as the blanket in your hands. For peasants, this was winter's rhythm. Nights defined not only by cold and smoke, but by the quiet gnaw of hunger that never entirely released its grip. You drift in and out of restless slumber until another sound interrupts the tolling of bells, faint but unmistakable, floating through the frozen night. At first you wonder if you are dreaming, but then you realize it is the parish church, its voice carrying across the fields, threading through the snow-laden darkness and into your smoky hut. It is well established from ecclesiastical records that church bells structured the rhythm of medieval life. They marked the hours of prayer, the call to Mass, and sometimes warnings of danger. Even at night, their sound reached into homes like yours, weaving the sacred into the fabric of everyday existence. Tonight, though, it is not the call of dawn. It is the bell for the nocturnal office, the prayers of monks echoing through the land while peasants slumbered. The sound is distant, softened by the wind, yet it slices through the muffled snores and coughs around you. For a moment, the hut feels lifted out of its smallness, joined to something larger. You imagine the monks rising from their stone cloisters, shivering in the cold, chanting psalms by candlelight. Their voices never reach you, but the bell itself bridges the worlds, sacred and ordinary, wealth and poverty, monastery and cottage. Curiously enough, some villagers believed the bell's sound had protective power. It was thought to drive away storms, frighten demons, even guard crops buried under snow. Whether or not that was truly believed by all, you feel a ripple of comfort as the note lingers in the air. It reassures you that someone, somewhere, is awake, keeping vigil while you sleep. Not all scholars agree on how much peasants heard or cared for these bells. Some argue that the sound was too faint to matter, while others insist it carried enormous significance, reminding villagers that their nights were not entirely their own, but folded into the rhythms of the church. You, lying here with your ears straining in the dark, cannot deny the effect. The bell is thin but steady, a thread that tethers your hut to the wider world. Your mother stirs, whispering a short prayer under her breath. Perhaps she was raised to bow her head at every bell, even half asleep. Your father shifts but does not wake fully, only murmurs and turns. The children do not stir at all, yet you remain awake, listening as the sound fades into the distance, swallowed by wind. A rather eccentric custom in some parishes was the passing bell tolled at night to mark a death. Families believed its sound helped guide the soul through the darkness. You wonder briefly if the note you heard was not the monk's office at all, but such a passing bell. The thought chills you. Perhaps even now another family in the village lies awake, mourning. The bell becomes more than sound. It becomes presence, reminder, warning, and comfort all at once. You lie still, your ears tuned. For a while there is only silence, the return of snores and the low grunt of the pig. Then, faintly, another bell, softer, shorter, perhaps an echo on the wind. It feels less ominous, more like reassurance, as though the night itself was saying, "Time continues, the world holds steady, you are not forgotten." The presence of bells shaped how peasants measured night. Without clocks, people learned to mark time by sound. The distant bell, the crow of a rooster, the shift in snoring patterns around the room. Tonight, you realize you are in that strange middle space long after first sleep. Not yet dawn. The bell confirms it. You are not lost in endless night. You are somewhere specific within it. You breathe deeply, letting the faint chime settle into your body. It feels almost like a lullaby, though no one intended it so. The idea that monks pray while you sleep comforts you, a sense that someone else carries part of the burden. You relax against the straw, the sound echoing faintly in your imagination even after it fades. Scholars sometimes debate whether these bells intruded on rest or enriched it. Were they interruptions, breaking sleep and sowing unease? Or gentle anchors, reminding villagers of their place in God's order? For you tonight, it is the latter. The sound carries not annoyance but calm, pulling your mind away from fleas, smoke, and hunger, and reminding you that beyond this hut stands a stone tower, and beyond that tower, the promise of dawn. The wind howls again, but the bell's echo lingers in your memory, steady and clear. You turn over, close your eyes, and drift into another stretch of slumber, soothed by the thought that even in the darkest hours, a voice carries across the land to say, "You are watched, you are counted, you are part of something greater than the cold." The faint echo of the bell still hums in your mind when another memory rises. Winter nights were not always so monotonous. In the bleak rhythm of cold and hunger, there came occasional sparks of joy, moments when sleep was broken not by coughing or fleas but by celebration. Midwinter festivals, Christmas feasts, or the revels around Epiphany could transform the long dark into something brighter, even if only for a night or two. We know from church calendars and village records that the Christmas season was one of the rare times when peasants enjoyed respite from their usual struggles. Lords sometimes distributed gifts of food or ale. Churches hosted services filled with light and song, and neighbors gathered to share what little they had. In those nights, families did not fall straight into bed after a thin meal. They stayed awake, feasting, singing, even playing games until sleep came later, heavier and sweeter. Curiously enough, some villages had the tradition of wassailing, carrying bowls of spiced ale or cider from house to house, toasting health and fortune in the coming year. The echoes of such merriment might drift across fields, laughter carried on the frosty air. breaking the silence of ordinary winter nights. You imagine how strange it must have felt, lying in bed and hearing distant singing where usually there was only the crackle of the hearth. Not all historians agree on how inclusive these festivities were. Some argue that the poorest peasants remained mostly spectators, unable to contribute much to communal feasts. Others believe that even the humblest huts saw small celebrations, with neighbors pooling resources to create at least the illusion of abundance. Tonight, you think of your own family's Christmas, your mother baking bread with honey if she had it, your father sharing a larger cup of ale than usual, your siblings laughing as if hunger had been banished for a night. The memories of such nights linger into sleep. Children, bellies full for once, dreamed of angels or of magical beasts, their snores lighter, their wriggles less restless. Adults, dulled by drink and cheer, sank more deeply into the straw, their usual worries suspended. Even the animals seemed calmer, as if soothed by the warmth of human voices raised in song. A rather eccentric custom tied to these nights was the Bean King, or King of Misrule, a figure chosen by finding a bean baked into a loaf or pie. Whoever found it became master of revels, issuing playful commands. Imagine, for one night, the oldest grandfather bowing to a child who ordered him to sing, or a mother pretending to serve her son as if he were lord of the manor. Laughter filled the smoky air, and for a brief time, hierarchy dissolved into shared joy. Tonight, though, the hut is quiet again, the feast only a memory. You lie in the straw, recalling the taste of roasted meat, perhaps the only time this winter you will have any, and the sweetness of honey on bread. That fullness has already faded from your belly, yet it lingers in your bones like warmth. Even hunger cannot erase the echo of feasting. Scholars debate how much such festivals truly relieved the hardships of peasant life. Some claim they were mere distractions, a way for the church and nobility to keep people content. Others argue they were vital, renewing morale, giving families the strength to endure the long stretch of winter ahead. You, remembering the laughter of your siblings and the flicker of candles in church, feel the truth in the second view. A single night of cheer could sustain hope for weeks. You shift in the bedding, scratching idly at a bite on your wrist, but the irritation feels less sharp as you recall the brightness of celebration. Your sister murmurs in her sleep, perhaps dreaming of the Christmas loaf, and you smile faintly in the dark. Even the memory of plenty feels like nourishment. Outside, the wind claws at the roof again, but tonight you do not feel quite as cowed. You carry within you the sound of singing, the warmth of shared ale, the flicker of candles. Sleep returns more easily, not heavy with fear or hunger, but softened by the reminder that winter nights were not all misery. Some were woven with laughter, stories, and the rare gift of abundance. And as you sink once more into slumber, you realize that in this world of hardship, joy was not an illusion, but a necessity. A bright ember carried through the longest nights, enough to make survival feel not just possible, but worth the struggle. The memory of feasting lingers warmly in your chest, but the hut soon settles back into its ordinary rhythm, the coughs, the snores, the scratch of straw. And then you notice another nightly rhythm, quieter but no less important, the murmur of voices, weaving through the dark like threads in a tapestry. Long before people fell into final sleep, gossip and stories drifted from pallet to pallet, filling the silence that might otherwise have been unbearable. We know from scattered court testimonies and folklore collections that peasants often spoke together in bed, their conversations stretching between first and second sleep. With no candles to waste and no books to read, the dark hours became time for whispered exchange. A wife might tell her husband what she heard at the well. Children might giggle over the day's mischief. Neighbors lodging together might trade tales of fields and lords. Tonight, you hear it clearly. A soft laugh from your brother, a question from your mother, your father's muttered reply. Their voices are low, cautious not to wake the youngest, but they ripple through the hut like an underground stream. One curious detail mentioned in medieval sermons is that priests sometimes scolded villagers for idle talk at night. Gossip was seen as sinful, a waste of time better spent praying or resting. Yet it was inevitable. In the cramped dark, speech was a way of shaking off fear, of reminding each other they were not alone. You imagine how unbearable the endless silence would feel without the comfort of voices. The subjects of talk varied wildly. Some nights it was practical, which neighbour's cow had calved, which field might need mending come spring, which debts were due. Other nights it was lighter, retelling a funny mishap in the village, laughing at the way the miller slipped in mud, joking about whose snoring sounded most like the pig in the corner. And then, sometimes, it was sharper rumours about infidelity, disputes over land, suspicions of theft. Tonight, you hear your parents' hushed voices debating whether the neighbour hoards extra grain, their tone edged with both envy and concern. Not all historians agree on how seriously such nighttime gossip shaped village life. Some suggest it was merely chatter, forgotten by morning. Others argue it carried weight, spreading reputations, deepening feuds, even sparking accusations that might later reach a manor court. As you lie here listening, you sense the power of words in the dark. Every murmur, every sigh could ripple beyond these smoky walls. An eccentric tradition in some regions involved telling folk tales during this interval, legends of saints, ghosts, or tricksters. A grandfather's voice might rise from his pallet, recounting how a saint once tamed wolves, or how a neighbour long ago met a demon on a lonely road. These stories were not just entertainment. They were warnings, explanations, sometimes moral lessons. Tonight, though, your grandfather only coughs and mutters before slipping back into shallow sleep. The role of storyteller falls instead to your brother, who whispers a crude joke about the neighbour's mule until he muffles his laughter in the blanket. The air grows warmer with the rhythm of voices. You realize how human it feels, how necessary. In a world where daylight hours were filled with toil, and winter offered few chances for communal gatherings, these hushed conversations were precious. They stitched people together in intimacy, honesty, and sometimes mischief. Without them, the night would belong only to the cold and to fear. You shift closer, catching fragments of words. Your mother mentions a dream she had, describing it in hushed tones, and your father hums thoughtfully, wondering aloud if it carries meaning. They do not sound worried, only curious. This too is part of the night. Dreams, gossip, news, all mingling into one shared stream of thought. Scholars still debate whether peasants valued privacy at all in these moments. Could individuals carve out secret space in such crowded huts? Or was everything sleep, warmth, talk collective? You feel the truth as you listen. Privacy is almost impossible here. Every word is overheard, every sigh noticed, every laugh shared. Even secrets find their way into the air eventually, whispered from pallet to pallet until they spill into the village by dawn. The conversation fades gradually. One voice trails off, another mutters in reply, until only the hum of breathing remains. Yet the warmth of connection lingers. You smile faintly in the dark, realizing that even in the bleakest season, human beings found ways to keep each other company. You close your eyes again, and as you drift, you imagine the same pattern repeating in huts across the village, families whispering before sleep, voices rising and falling like waves. These murmurs are not recorded in chronicles, not written in court rolls, but they were the heartbeat of winter nights. And with that thought, you surrender again to the pull of second sleep, your dreams threaded with the sound of voices fading into silence. The murmurs fade, and soon only the wind outside fills your ears. But tonight the gusts carry a sharper edge, a sound that makes the hair on your neck rise, the low, distant howl of something not human. You freeze, every muscle tightening, because you know that beyond the flimsy walls of the hut lurks one of winter's greatest terrors, wolves. It is well documented in medieval chronicles that wolves prowled the edges of villages, especially in the harshest winters. When hunger drove them closer, they snatched livestock, scavenged near dung heaps, and sometimes even attacked people caught alone in the snow. Tonight, as you lie on your straw pallet, the faint cry drifts across the frozen fields, and your imagination leaps to the worst. A pack circling the village, yellow eyes glowing, paws silent on the snow. Your mother stirs at the sound. She pulls the blanket tighter around the child beside her, whispering a quick prayer. Your father shifts, half awake, his hand brushing the wooden club kept by the door. Even half asleep, he is ready to defend the household. The pig snorts nervously. The goat rustles in its tether, and suddenly the hut feels fragile. Every creak of timber a reminder that thin walls are no barrier against desperate beasts. Curiously enough, some villagers believed wolves could be warded off by charms, bits of iron hung above doors, or the sign of the cross etched into beams. You glance at the doorway and imagine a faint chalk cross still smudged there from last season, a little defense against the night. Whether it truly repelled wolves or simply calmed frightened minds, the effect was the same. People felt less helpless. Not all historians agree on how frequent wolf attacks truly were. Some argue they were rare, exaggerated into legend. Others point to repeated reports of wolf hunts ordered by lords, suggesting the threat was real enough to warrant organized defense. You, lying here with your heart pounding, feel no need to pass the statistics. One howl in the night is enough to make danger real. The sound grows louder, closer. Another howl joins the first, then a third. You picture the pack moving together, lean bodies slipping like shadows between trees, drawn by the scent of livestock, perhaps even the faint aroma of your hut itself. The children stir in their sleep, whimpering faintly, sensing the unease in the air. Your father mutters, rising slowly, careful not to disturb the fire. He listens at the door, every muscle taut. A rather eccentric belief held in some places was that wolves were servants of the devil, their howls echoing his laughter across the fields. Priests preached sermons warning villagers not to wander after dusk, lest wolves carry their souls away. The thought chills you now, though in truth, the fear is practical enough. To step outside would be to invite death, teeth flashing in the snow. The animals grow restless, their noises sharper. The pig squeals once, quickly hushed. The goat stomps its hooves against the floor. Your mother hushes the children, pulling them tighter into the mass of blankets. For a few long minutes, the hut is a cage of fear, everyone listening to the cries beyond the walls. And then, as suddenly as it came, the howling shifts, moving farther off. The wind carries it away, until only silence returns. The family exhales together, relief mingling with exhaustion. Your father lowers himself back onto the pallet, though he keeps the club within reach. No one speaks, but the tension lingers, every ear still straining for another sound. Scholars debate whether wolves truly haunted villages so often, or whether their presence in stories exaggerated their menace. But lying here, the echo of their cries still in your chest, you understand why the tales endured. Wolves were not merely animals, they were the embodiment of winter's hunger, predators that mirrored your own desperation. Slowly, the hut quiets again, the animals settle, the children's breathing steadies, and the fire crackles softly. You pull your blanket closer, heart still racing but beginning to calm. Outside, the snow lies deep, covering tracks, covering danger. Inside, you cling to warmth and to the fragile walls that keep the night at bay. And as sleep returns, you realize the truth. Winter was never endured alone. Families huddled together, animals tethered nearby, charms drawn on doors, all small defenses against the vast, hungry dark. Tonight, the wolves have passed. Tomorrow, they may return. But for now, you let your eyes close, carried into uneasy dreams where howls echo faintly on the edge of silence. The night grows quieter after the howls fade, but soon another sound rises, softer, more constant, the sigh of the wind squeezing through the cracks in the walls. It creeps along the floor like invisible water, chilling ankles and numbing fingers. More than beasts or hunger, it is the draught that defines the peasant's winter sleep. It is well established from archaeological remains of cottages and reconstructions of medieval dwellings that peasant homes were far from airtight. Wattle and daub walls cracked with the seasons, thatched roofs let in drips of melted snow, and wooden shutters rattled loosely against their frames. Tonight, you feel it clearly, a cold finger tracing your cheek, a whisper of frost curling into your blanket. No matter how tightly you wrap yourself, the wind always finds a way in. Your brother mutters angrily, yanking the blanket higher over his head. Your mother shifts closer to the hearth, dragging the child bundle with her. The pig groans, adjusting itself against the floor, perhaps chasing warmth of its own. Everyone in the hut reacts instinctively to drafts, moving, tugging, pressing closer. Sleep becomes a dance with the cold, each shift of bodies an attempt to block some unseen current. Curiously enough, some households stuffed gaps in the walls with moss, straw, or even animal dung to keep out the wind. You can smell faint traces of it in the daub nearby. Earthy, sour, but effective enough to dull the worst gusts. It is not elegant, but it keeps your teeth from chattering. And yet, despite every effort, the draught remains a constant companion, brushing across faces, slipping under blankets, reminding you that walls are never enough. Not all historians agree on how severe these drafts were. Some argue that cottages, though primitive, insulated better than modern minds assume. Others insist the cold must have been relentless, citing tales of water freezing in buckets beside the hearth. Tonight, you side with the latter. Your toes feel stiff, your breath steams in the air, and even with the fire glowing faintly, the hut holds more frost than warmth. The effects of drafts went beyond discomfort. They shaped where people slept, always clustered toward the center, away from walls and doors. They dictated how often fires were stoked, how thick blankets had to be, and even how people lay against one another, creating living barriers against the cold. Tonight, you are wedged between siblings, your shoulder pressed tightly to your sister's back, both of you unconsciously forming a shield against the chill curling through the cracks. A rather eccentric remedy recorded in some villages was hanging damp cloths against shutters, the frozen fabric acting as an extra layer against the wind. Imagine mothers dipping rags in water, draping them, and waking to find them stiff and glittering with ice. The image is strange, but it speaks to the desperate creativity of people fighting nightly drafts. The fire crackles faintly, but even its warmth cannot reach every corner. Your grandfather coughs in his spot near the hearth, yet even he shivers, pulling his sheepskin tighter. You can almost see the draft ripple across the room, stirring embers, tickling straw, creeping over everybody. It is not loud, not violent, just steady, inescapable. Scholars sometimes debate whether such nightly discomfort hardened peasants into resilience or simply wore them down. Did constant cold strengthen their tolerance? Or did it erode health until coughs, fevers, and rheumatism became permanent? Listening to your own lungs wheeze faintly in the smoky air, you suspect it was both. People survived because they had no choice, but each winter carved its mark into their bones. You curl tighter, tucking your nose beneath the blanket. Your breath warms the wool slightly, dampening it, but even that small pocket of heat feels like salvation. Your sister presses back against you, sighing as the warmth passes between you. Across the hut, your father stirs, dragging another log toward the hearth. The glow brightens briefly, then dulls again, but the movement alone reassures you someone is always tending the balance between heat and cold. Eventually, exhaustion outweighs discomfort. You no longer notice every draft, every icy touch. The body, resilient as ever, decides to surrender, to rest despite the cold. Your eyes close, your limbs loosen, and you drift back into sleep, carried by the rhythm of shared warmth and the quiet endurance that defined so many winter nights. And so you learn again the lesson every peasant knew. Sleep was never perfect, never free of interruption. It was survival, stitched from scraps, patching walls with moss, patching blankets with rags, patching nights with stolen warmth. Tonight is no different. Tonight, despite the drafts and coughs and howls, you sleep because you must, because the body insists, and because dawn, however far away, will eventually come. The draft fades into the background, a constant but almost forgotten companion, when another presence makes itself felt: the animals. Their breath fills the room as surely as your family's does. Every snort, shuffle and rustle reminds you that in a peasant's hut, humans were never the only sleepers. It is well known from manorial surveys and ethnographic parallels that peasants often sheltered animals indoors through winter nights. A pig, a goat, a cow if space allowed, even chickens tucked into corners, all of them shared the warmth, the smells and the air. Tonight, you feel the pig's heat radiating faintly from across the room, hear the goat's hooves shifting against the earthen floor, and catch the faint flutter of wings as a chicken resettles in the rafters. Their presence is as ordinary as your siblings. The benefits were practical. Animals generated warmth, each body a small furnace that helped fight the drafts. The pig's bulk, in particular, gave off steady heat, making the hut a few degrees warmer than it might have been otherwise. You imagine what it would be like without them: colder, emptier, the silence less bearable. Strange as it may seem, you are grateful for the pig's occasional grunt. Curiously enough, some villages treated animals indoors almost as members of the household. Songs and prayers included them. Children whispered to them as they fell asleep, and folk charms promised to protect both family and livestock under one roof. Tonight, your sister's hand trails against the goat's flank, stroking it as she drifts back into slumber. The gesture is tender, as though the animal were another sibling. Not all historians agree on how common this arrangement was. Some argue that animals were only brought in during the harshest nights, while others believe it was routine throughout the cold months. You, lying here amid the smells and sounds, know the latter to be true, at least in huts like this. Winter survival depended on every bit of warmth and security animals could provide. But with warmth came discomfort. The stench of manure lingers heavily in the smoky air. Even in your half-sleep, you wrinkle your nose, pressing the blanket closer to your face. The pig shifts noisily, snuffling for scraps long since gone, and the chickens rustle feathers, dropping small reminders of their presence onto the straw. The mingling of smells, smoke, sweat, dung becomes overwhelming at times, thick enough to sting the eyes. Yet over time, your senses dull to it. What would sicken a stranger becomes ordinary, almost invisible to those who live with it nightly. A rather eccentric custom, recorded in certain folk tales, described families whispering charms to their animals before bed, believing that calm livestock meant calm dreams. Whether it worked or not, you notice tonight how the goat settles more quickly when your mother murmurs to it, her voice soothing even in drowsiness. Perhaps belief itself shaped reality. The presence of animals also meant danger. If wolves prowled near, the first sign was often the agitation of beasts indoors. If fire sparked, straw and manure could turn them into frantic hazards, trampling and overturning whatever lay in their path. You hear it tonight in the pig's uneasy shifting after the distant howls earlier, its restlessness rippling into the room's mood. Scholars sometimes argue about the psychological effect of this constant closeness between people and animals. Did it blur boundaries, fostering empathy and affection? Or did it harden peasants, reducing animals to tools whose noise and smell had to be tolerated? Perhaps it was both. Tonight, you feel the contradiction yourself, annoyed by the stench, yet comforted by the pig's warmth, irritated by the goat's hooves, yet reassured by its presence. Your brother groans as the chicken clucks softly above his head, a feather drifting down onto his cheek. He brushes it away irritably, then laughs quietly at himself. Even annoyance becomes part of the shared humor of nights like these. Tomorrow he may tell others how the chicken tried to roost on his face, and laughter will ripple through the village. The fire dims, smoke thickens, Animals sigh and settle. You close your eyes again, accepting the reality that winter nights are crowded, noisy, pungent, but never lonely. In this hut, every creature breathes the same air, every life bound together against the cold. Sleep comes not despite the animals, but with them, folded into the rough chorus of human and beast alike. And so you drift once more, lulled by the grunts, sighs, and rustling wings around you. For in the medieval night, survival was always communal, and sometimes the warmest comfort came not only from family, but from the steady, breathing presence of the animals who shared your shelter. The hut has grown heavy with breath, human and animal alike, when another weight intrudes. Silence too deep, broken only by the scrape of the wind. You stir uneasily, because silence in the medieval night was rarely trusted. It invited thoughts that crept in like the cold, and often those thoughts belonged to fears of witches, curses, and unseen powers. It is well attested in inquisitorial records and scattered parish sermons that peasants believed winter nights especially vulnerable to sorcery. The long hours of dark, the weakened body, the half-waking state between first and second sleep, all seem to make souls porous. Tonight, as you roll on the straw, your imagination sparks with the same unease. Perhaps the chill that sneaks under your blanket is not mere draught, but some curse drifting in through cracks. Curiously enough, some households hung protective charms in the rafters, bundles of herbs, carved wooden figures, or even tiny shoes left behind by children, thought to trick witches into snatching the decoy rather than the real sleepers. You squint toward the dim beams overhead and wonder if a faded bundle of dried herbs still dangles there. The smell of time might have long since faded, but its presence would still carry weight in the mind. Not all scholars agree on how deeply peasants feared witchcraft in the centuries before the great witch trials. Some argue that belief was casual, folded into daily custom without overwhelming dread. Others see it as a constant anxiety, especially in winters when illness, hunger, or sudden death seemed inexplicable. You, lying here in smoke and straw, sense how easily the mind leaps from natural discomforts to supernatural explanations. A child coughing too long, a pig refusing to eat such things beg for reasons when survival feels so fragile. Your mother shifts and whispers a brief prayer. Perhaps she too felt the stillness. Her words are soft, barely audible, but they cut through the silence with a rhythm that reassures. Beside her, the child sighs, calmed by the cadence of familiar sound. For prayers, charms, and whispered psalms were the nightly companions against fears too vast to name. A rather eccentric belief, found in some rural corners, held that turning one's clothes inside out before bed could prevent witches from stealing one's soul during sleep. The logic was that spirits, confused by the reversed garment, would pass over the sleeper. Tonight, you wonder if your brother, who often listens to such tales, sleeps with his tunic inside out under the blankets. It would explain his smugness when he claims he never dreams of demons. The silence thickens again, broken only by a crack of frost on the roof. You think of stories told by firelight of witches who crept through keyholes as smoke, who rode animals in the night until they collapsed, who whispered into sleepers' ears and left them waking exhausted, as if drained. Whether true or not, these tales give shape to what you feel now. The weight on your chest, the shallowness of breath, the unease that presses as you drift. Scholars debate whether such fears were imposed more by church sermons warning of Satan's servants, or by older folk traditions carried in whispers long before. Either way, they shaped the psychology of sleep. Each night was not only a battle against cold and hunger, but also against imagination, the conviction that unseen forces prowled in the dark. The pig shifts suddenly, snorting loud enough to jolt you upright. Your heart races. For a second you wonder if some spirit brushed past, disturbing even the animals. Then you hear your grandfather coughing again, a reminder that the world remains ordinary after all. Still, the fear lingers, sticky and hard to shake. You pull the blanket tighter, burying your face in the wool. Its smell is strong sweat, smoke, lanolin but grounding. You remind yourself that the hut is crowded, that no witch could slip past so many eyes, and yet the stories remain. Even as your eyelids grow heavy, you half expect to feel a weight pressing down, the old nightmare of the night hag who steals breath. Eventually, exhaustion wins. Your limbs soften, your thoughts slow. Fear fades into the background hum, just another thread woven into the fabric of medieval nights. Tomorrow, you might whisper to your sister about the moment when the pig stirred, making her laugh nervously. The fear will be reshaped into a tale, retold until it becomes less menace and more story. For now, though, you drift into uneasy sleep once more, folded in blankets and prayers, knowing that belief itself, whether in God, in charms, or in the power of whispered tales, was often as important as the blankets or the fire. It was the unseen layer that kept souls warm, guarding fragile rest through the endless dark. The silence after your unease does not last. A thin wail pierces the smoky air, high and fragile, the cry of an infant waking in the darkest stretch of night. At once, the fragile balance of sleep in the hut is undone. Your mother stirs with a groan, already reaching for the small bundle pressed between her and the warmth of the blankets. It is well known from household accounts and early parish notes that infants dictated much of the nightly rhythm in peasant families. Their hunger ignored the pattern of first and second sleep. Their cries cut through fatigue like a knife. Tonight, you watch your mother gather the baby against her chest, pulling aside cloths so he can nurse, his small fists pressing against her skin as he latches. The room fills with the steady suckling sound, strangely soothing despite the disruption. The other children grumble in half-sleep, turning over. Your father mutters and adjusts the blanket, but he does not rise. For him, the duty lies elsewhere. Mothers bore the burden of these midnight wakings, their bodies both the alarm and the remedy. In a world without bottles, formula, or stored milk, a child's cry was answered only with the body of its mother. Curiously enough, some midwives advised that infants should be nursed, especially often in winter, believing that cold sapped their strength more quickly. Others warned against overfeeding at night, fearing it would make babies sickly. You think of your mother, weary-eyed, choosing instinct over advice, letting the infant feed until his cries soften into sighs. Not all historians agree on how restful nights could ever have been in such circumstances. Some argue that mothers, accustomed to the cycle, dozed lightly while feeding, finding pockets of rest even with a baby at the breast. Others insist the disruption was constant, making true deep sleep rare for years at a time. Watching your mother now, her eyelids drooping even as she rocks slightly, you see truth in both views. She is both exhausted and serene, held in that twilight state where care becomes reflex. A rather eccentric practice, found in scattered folklore, was giving babies a rag soaked in honey water to suck at night, especially when mothers were too drained to nurse. Whether it soothed or harmed is uncertain, but the idea reveals desperation, an attempt to quiet cries in the endless dark. Tonight, you imagine some neighbor across the village dipping cloth into a clay pot of honey, praying the sweetness would bring sleep. The cries fade as the baby relaxes, his small body slack against your mother's chest. She hums faintly, a tune you recognize but cannot place, perhaps a lullaby passed down from her own mother. The sound drifts across the hut, calming even the half-awake children, the rhythm of her voice weaving a blanket of its own. For a moment, you feel the entire family exhale together, as though the cry had tied every heart in a knot, now loosened. Scholars debate whether infants were cherished with the same tenderness we assume today, or regarded with stoic pragmatism in light of high mortality. Some sources suggest a resigned detachment, others reveal fierce affection. Watching your mother cradle the child so closely, her lips brushing his hair, there is little doubt where the truth lies in this hut. Whatever the statistics, the bond is fierce, immediate and unbroken by fear of loss. The baby stirs again, fussing, and your mother sighs, shifting him to her other arm. She pats his back gently, waiting for the tiny burp that finally escapes. The sound is soft, almost comic, and you find yourself smiling in the dark. Even small moments like this lighten the heaviness of the night. But disruption has consequences. Your brother scratches noisily, your grandfather coughs, the pig groans. Sleep, once settled, has fractured again. It takes long minutes for the room to quiet, for breathing to steady. In that lull, you realize how fragile rest is here, always conditional, always vulnerable to the smallest sound. Your mother finally settles the baby back between blankets, tucking him securely with the others. She lies down slowly, her body curling protectively around him. Her eyes close before her head even rests fully, exhaustion claiming her instantly. You feel a pang of awe and sorrow, realizing that her nights are never truly her own. Gradually, silence returns. The baby sighs once, then falls fully into slumber. The family's rhythm resumes, uneven but steady. You close your eyes, letting the calm wash over you once more, though you know it may not last. Another cry may rise before dawn, another disruption breaking the fragile weave of sleep. And yet, you also know this. In every peasant hut across the land, the same pattern repeats. Infants cry, mothers stir, families adjust. Rest is fractured, but life continues. And in that cycle, weary though it is, lies the future of the village, the fragile breath of children ensuring that spring, when it finally comes, will greet more than ghosts. The baby settles, and once more the hut exhales into uneasy quiet. Yet your own body remains restless, because another presence nags at you, your bladder. In the medieval night, even something so ordinary as relieving oneself became a trial, shaped by cold, darkness, and fear. It is well recorded in household accounts that chamber pots were a staple in cottages, though often just crude wooden buckets or earthen jars. Families kept them near the hearth or at the foot of the bedding, shared by all through the long hours. Tonight, you know there is such a vessel tucked in the corner, half hidden by blankets. The thought of using it in this cramped hut makes you hesitate. Still, the alternative, stepping outside into snow, drafts, and perhaps wolves, feels worse. Your father stirs, mutters, then rises slowly, grumbling under his breath. He fumbles toward the pot, the floor creaking, and you turn your face into the blanket, trying to ignore the sound. The act is not private, never could be, but it is accepted. Everyone pretends not to hear, not to notice. Dignity is thin in a world where survival demands constant sharing. Curiously enough, some families sprinkled ashes into their chamber pots, both to mask smell and to keep contents from freezing. You remember seeing your mother do it earlier in the evening, scooping a handful from the hearth and tossing it casually into the bucket. Even so, the stench lingers faintly now, sharp and sour in the smoky air. Not all historians agree on how peasants regarded these nightly necessities. Some describe them as shameful, endured in silence. Others argue they were matter of fact, accepted as one more part of communal living. You, lying here pretending to sleep as your father returns to his pallet, feel the awkwardness keenly, yet also the inevitability. In a hut where every breath is shared, privacy is illusion. A rather eccentric solution, mentioned in a few regional accounts, involved digging shallow pits directly inside the cottage, lined with straw and covered daily. The thought makes you wrinkle your nose. Living and sleeping atop such arrangements seems unbearable. Yet for some families, too poor to own a vessel, it was the only option. Your brother shifts, perhaps awakened by the noise, and groans. He mutters a joke under his breath, something about pigs having better manners, and then drifts back into snores. Even humor becomes a shield against discomfort. Tomorrow, the story may be retold with laughter. Father stumbled into the pot again. In this way, what could humiliate becomes part of the hut's shared folklore. The practical reality of chamber pots is more serious, though. Illness spread easily when sanitation faltered, and winter's limited chances to empty or clean vessels. The frozen ground outside made disposal difficult, and so huts often carried the pungent undertone of stale waste. Tonight, you smell it mingling with smoke and sweat, layered into the atmosphere so completely it becomes another part of the hut's identity. Scholars still debate whether peasants truly noticed these smells as strongly as we imagine, or whether familiarity dulled the senses. Some argue that noses adapted, others that complaints about stench pepper records precisely because it was intolerable. You find yourself in the middle, certain that you notice, certain also that your body adjusts, refusing to stay awake forever because of odor. Your eyes close again, even as the smell lingers. The warmth of bodies, the heaviness of exhaustion, the fading memory of bells and howls all outweigh the discomfort. Slowly, your breathing steadies. Around you, snores resume their rhythm, the fire sighs, and the night creeps forward. Before sleep takes you again, you realize how much the medieval night was shaped by such simple facts. Not by noble deeds or great battles, but by the small, unglamorous details of survival. Where to sleep, how to eat, when to relieve oneself. Each act carried weight in a hut so crowded, so fragile. Each act shaped whether rest could continue, or whether the night fractured into wakefulness once more. And with that recognition, you surrender back to slumber, even as the stench lingers faintly in the air. For peasants, dignity was a luxury. Sleep, however patched together, mattered more. And so you close your eyes, letting exhaustion dull every discomfort, drifting once again into the tide of second sleep. The smoky air thickens again as the fire dies lower and your sleep grows heavier, but with heaviness comes dreams once more, strange visions stitched together from hunger, fear, and memory. Dreams have always been the territory of prophecy and superstition, and in the medieval night they carried meanings that shaped how families faced the morning. It is clear from collections of sermons and village tales that dreams were rarely dismissed as random. A vision of overflowing bread might be read as a sign of coming harvest, while a nightmare of wolves could confirm the fears already prowling outside the hut. Tonight, your own mind builds its imagery from the scraps of sound and scent that linger in the room. You dream first of the pig, but it is no ordinary pig. It glows faintly, like an ember, and when it snorts, sparks fly from its nostrils. Your siblings laugh and clap, warming their hands on its breath. The fire burns low in the hearth, yet the animal itself becomes flame. You know it makes no sense, but in the dream it feels true. Warmth will come from beasts when wood runs short. Curiously enough, some records show that villagers shared their dreams aloud the next morning, letting the family debate what they meant. Children's dreams, especially, were sometimes taken as innocent prophecies. A little one might murmur about a field full of grain, and the adults would nod gravely, taking it as a sign that God would be merciful. Perhaps tomorrow you will describe your fiery pig, and laughter will mingle with a quiet hope that it promises warmth ahead. Not every historian agrees on how consistently peasants relied on dreams for guidance. Some argue they were treated as little more than tales for amusement, while others point to repeated references to prophetic dreams in chronicles, suggesting deep seriousness. You, half sleeping, half dreaming, know how powerful the visions feel in the moment. They shape your emotions even if logic dismisses them by day. The dream shifts. Now you find yourself walking through snow, but the flakes glow with soft light, like sparks falling from heaven. Each one that lands on your skin burns slightly but leaves behind warmth instead of frost. You laugh in the dream, twirling, catching flakes on your tongue, until the warmth fills your chest. Then the light grows too bright, blinding, and you stumble, realizing the snow has caught fire. Fear jolts you awake for a moment, your chest rising sharply as you suck smoky air. You press your eyes shut, willing sleep back, and soon it comes again, delivering gentler images. Fields of rye bowing in the wind, children chasing one another, under a summer sun, your mother's hands pulling loaves from a glowing oven. These visions are so vivid you taste bread on your tongue, smell grain in the wind. Hunger has written itself directly into your dream, feeding you in ways waking life cannot. A rather eccentric detail preserved in a few monastic writings is the belief that demons sometimes crept into dreams, disguised as animals or even lovers, to tempt the sleeper. Nightmares were not just misfiring minds but moral battlegrounds. You remember this now, and you wonder uneasily if your fiery pig was comfort or temptation. The thought lingers as you shift in the straw, sweat prickling on your back despite the cold air. Your sister murmurs beside you, caught in her own visions. She whispers something about apples, reaching her hand out as though plucking fruit from the dark. The sound is tender, and you wonder if her dream is sweeter than yours. Dreams ripple across the room like unseen currents, everyone caught in their own yet tethered by shared breath. Scholars continue to debate whether dreams genuinely altered decisions in daily life, whether a bad vision might keep someone from traveling, or a good one embolden them to sow early. Whatever the case, in the moment, dreams feel real enough to leave marks on hearts. When you wake tomorrow, the pig's embers and burning snow will still cling to your memory, shaping how you view the day. For now, you drift in and out, weaving through visions both bright and frightening. Each dream reflects the night itself, part warmth, part hunger, part fear. And when at last you slip into deeper sleep, it feels less like escape and more like immersion into another layer of the same reality. The night feels endless, yet slowly, imperceptibly, the tone of the darkness begins to change. The air, still bitter cold, grows just a little lighter, as though the black has thinned into deep blue. Your ears pick it up before your eyes do, a rooster's uncertain crow, then another, followed by the stirring of animals in their corners. After hours of broken sleep, you realize you are approaching the end of the long winter night. It is well recorded in chronicles and farming manuals that peasants rose not with clocks, but with the first hints of dawn and the cries of livestock. Sleep ended not when the body had enough, but when duty called. Tonight, you feel the weight of this truth pressing down on you. Your limbs ache from the straw, your skin itches from fleas, your throat burns from smoke, and yet you know rest is almost over. Around you, the family begins to stir. Your father grumbles, rubbing his face. Your mother stretches stiffly, careful not to wake the infant still wrapped against her chest. Your siblings mumble and roll, reluctant to leave the blankets, but even they sense that sleep can no longer last. The hut fills with the groan of joints, the sigh of waking breaths, the rustle of straw as bodies sit up. Curiously enough, some villagers prayed immediately upon waking, offering thanks for surviving another night. Others crossed themselves before even standing, acknowledging how fragile rest could be. You hear your mother whisper a few words now, her lips barely moving, her eyes closed as though she clings to both gratitude and exhaustion. Not all historians agree on how long peasants truly slept in winter. Some argue they managed 8 or 9 hours across both sleeps. Others insist their rest was fractured and shallow, never fully refreshing. You, blinking in the dim light, feel the latter, as though the night gave you not true rest but only enough strength to stumble into the next day. A rather eccentric tradition in some households involved marking the first morning of the new year or certain feast days by leaping from the straw shouting blessings or songs. You smile, faintly imagining it, though in this hut no one leaps. Everyone moves like creaking timber, slow and stiff. Still, even without cheer, there is a quiet relief. Another night is behind you. Your grandfather coughs awake, his wheeze deep but steady. He mutters about the fire, and your father bends to stir the ashes, coaxing a faint flame back into life. The room brightens slightly, not with sunlight yet, but with orange glow reflected on soot-streaked walls. Animals snort and shuffle, eager for food. The rooster crows again, louder this time, as though reminding everyone that dawn waits for no one. The blankets fall back, the borrowed warmth disperses, and the real cold of morning sweeps in. You shiver violently, clutching your thin tunic around your shoulders. The night may be over, but winter's grip has not loosened. Your body aches for the straw again, but necessity pushes you forward. Scholars often discuss whether peasants dreaded rising in winter more than any other part of the day. Was it the cold that cut deepest, or the endless labor that followed? Perhaps both. But in this moment, you understand something else. Waking itself was a triumph. Every dawn reached meant survival, proof that hunger, cold, and spirits had not claimed you. Your sister yawns, rubbing her eyes with tiny fists. The infant whimpers softly, then settles again. Your mother smooths her hair with one hand while adjusting her shawl with the other. Around you, the hut fills with the sounds of preparation, a rhythm as familiar as sleep itself. And as you rise, stiff and weary, you feel the first pale streak of light seep through the shutter's cracks. It is faint, but it is enough. The night has ended. You survived one more winter's sleep, itching, coughing, shivering, yet still breathing. That, in the world of medieval peasants, was victory enough. Now the story slows, soft as the last embers in a hearth. You sit quietly, listening to the gentle breath of those still dozing, the faint stirring of animals, the whisper of dawn against the shutters. The weight of the night lifts little by little, replaced not by sudden light, but by the slow certainty that darkness does not last forever. You let your shoulders ease, sinking back into the straw one final time, not to sleep again, but to savor the comfort of stillness. Every sound that felt oppressive in the dark, the coughs, the snores, the scratching now fades into something softer, like the fading hum of a lullaby. Even the cold feels gentler, not biting but reminding you of the body wrapped safely in its fragile layers. In this moment, you understand what peasants must have felt, rising day after day from such nights. The relief that another dawn had come, the quiet pride of enduring what seemed unendurable. And as you breathe with them, across centuries, you realize their nights are not so different from ours, broken, imperfect, yet threaded with the same need for comfort, closeness, and hope. Let your mind linger on the slow crackle of the fire, the warmth of blankets stitched with love, the murmur of prayers whispered against the dark. Let those images soften the edge of your own thoughts until they blur and drift away. The night has passed, the dawn is patient, and you too are safe within it. Sweet dreams,